Radifa the maid informs Faye, the third prince of the kingdom of Diesburg, that he must wake up. Faye explains why. He explains that if he had a second chance at life, he would want to live it in such a way that he wouldn't have to take up a sword. Radifa says she wants to call the headmaid. Faye says the headmaid is too busy to wake the princes and laughs that the girl is actually threatening him. The maid closes the door and apologizes for the intrusion. The woman suddenly grabs Faye by the leg. He says, "Damn it," trying to dodge it, and screams no when she grabs his arm. Faye is shocked and says, "What?" The woman jumps on Faye. He fights back, then tries to dodge her attack. He is punched in the face by the headmaid, Feli von Juchstein. Feli tells him that she can't believe he tried to run away as soon as he saw her, and that it's not proper to treat a lady like that. He indignantly points out that Feli is over 100 years old and asks what kind of lady she is. Faye says there's no need for him to fight on the front lines. The man explains that it's okay if Faye serves as backup, especially since Feli will be by his side. The woman explains that Feli is experienced enough to face the best knights, and Faye has nothing to worry about. Faye says his presence is merely for appearances, and if he sees there's no chance of victory, he can flee without even attempting a fight, and can retreat at any time to save himself. He says that since it's acceptable, he'll take on the task. Faye says, "I'm sorry." The girl and Faye hear the door close. The first heir to the throne of Gwirial Hanse Diesburg says, "Brother." Faye asks why his brother needs to apologize, since it was originally his duty to fulfill. The first heir to the throne explains that his father didn't allow him to leave. Faye says his brother shouldn't think he's like a warrior who's about to die a spectacular death on the battlefield. His brother explains that, unlike now when he went into his first battle, he led a reinforcement group, and victory was a foregone conclusion. Faye tells him his brother is right. Gwirial says, Faye is strong. McJugna reports that in the war, in battle, he could not tremble because he was already broken. He states that his teacher and friends were all fighting to survive, and repeats the word fight several times to show the intensity of the fighting. He reports that by the time he was left alone, he had become known as the Emperor of Swords. He reports that he killed tens of millions of enemies, and after all these battles, all that remains is a pile of corpses and endless loneliness. He recounts how he lost his teacher and friends, but continued to fight to stay alive. Someone is calling Faye. The Sword Emperor, who used the sword to survive, eventually succumbed to loneliness and committed suicide due to the absence of loved ones, and as punishment, he was unable to reach him. Faye explains that he was reincarnated as Faye Hans, the third prince of Diesburg, and he would no longer wish to wield the sword if he had the chance. Mujina informs that they will arrive soon and asks Your Highness to prepare. He says, Faye explains that he can't open his eyes because it's his first flight and he's dizzy and has a headache. Feli suggests going outside for some fresh air. Faye says that's a bad idea. The men discuss why the third prince was sent to them and speculate that it is due to the expectation of a lost battle, as well as the possibility that Prince Gwirial might come. He says that he considers it fair, and the girl stands silently nearby. Prince Faye announces that he has arrived with supplies and troops in accordance with the treaty and proposes to end their differences. Princess Mephia Zwe of Phyllis says it has been years since their last meeting and asks if he remembers her. Faye explains that of course he does. It's the Boar Princess. She replies, "Who did he call a boar?" The woman explains that the war wasn't going so badly, and they've been under siege for over a month, but some time ago, a hero attacked head-on. The man explains that because of this hero, they had to sacrifice most of their remaining warriors to defend the gates. Faye says it was all done by one hero. The girl remains silent. She explains that it's wrong to say that because they didn't truly see the hero's true strength, he was no longer human. The girl explains that even if they attacked the hero head-on, she would simply lead the people to certain death and no longer knows how to defeat the hero. Mephia explains that no matter how you look at it, it's a losing war, and if there was a guy who would agree to fight such a battle, he would either be overconfident or crazy. The girl shouts that he's joking and accuses Faye of abandoning a country he's allied with because of his lack of faith in victory, even though the troops he led weren't defeated. Faye explains that he didn't come here to kill himself or his people and doesn't want to die in the kingdom of Apillis. Faye tells him to be honest and just tell him how she thinks about leaving her troops here and leaving, but he says he won't go anywhere with her anyway. Mephia protests that she never said anything of the sort and then calls Faye a trash prince. The man apologizes and says he'll go tell King Aphilis the same thing. Faye says so-and-so. The girl is crying and looks upset. Mephia asks what he means. He explains that a person can only absorb a sword, and if he takes up the sword, everything will be over. He explains that the moment a person takes up the sword, he becomes trapped in an illusion, the illusion that he has become strong. Faye says this is the first step to death, and if he starts swinging his deadly weapon as if it's normal, there will be no turning back. He explains that the only way is forward, down a path where there is nothing but death. After this, the man declares that he will not take up the sword. The girl tells Faye that he made the right decision, as his country has an extremely slim chance of surviving, and he doesn't want to put Faye in danger just because of their pact. The man asks when he'll be returning home. He says he wants the man to take Mafia with him. The man explains that he requested that he lead the Deesburg reinforcements, adding that only he can protect Mafia because he is smart, calm, and reasonable. The man explains that Faye has been a very kind child since childhood and that he believes in him. Faye says that he will simply force her to board the ship and take her home, and also informs that this is not such an unexpected act from someone whom even Princess Mafia herself considers a trash prince. The girl says he's probably sweet and sweet. She explains that he's a character, and she thinks it's important to be a character from time to time. The knight shouts to destroy the remnants of the Aphelis. Feely strikes, repelling the enemies. Faye reports that there are enemy scouts again, and the girl asks which ones, and Faye replies that they are the 8th. He reports that it is terrible and explains that there is nothing left but corpses. Faye explains that the hero's strength gap is colossal, and he could destroy the gate if they're not careful. He advises them to do everything in their power before their escape route is completely lost, and suggests convincing Lyric and Princess Cabanica to flee and find shelter somewhere quiet. Faye asks Mafia to wait and addresses her as Her Highness. The guy asks who he is. Faye replies that he is from the kingdom of Deesburg. Faye says she can only ease the pain. The man says she can't save him anymore. The woman explains there are wounded in the house and wants the man to use his magic on them. Faye is asked to quickly call the soldiers. The girl explains that it's better to die with a smile. Faye tells him he can't move. He says to live for others. He explains that one should live not for oneself, but for others, to serve others, and believes that this is the only way to die with a smile on one's face. Faye tells him to take the sword and fight for what's important to him. He says he's giving it to him because it's the only thing he can offer right now. Faye explains that he doesn't think his interlocutor's opinion is wrong. The guy says Faye caught him, and therefore he must fulfill his request. He says he can't accept it and can't live like that under any circumstances. He explains that he has always fought, lived, and died for himself, and all he can do is live his life without holding a sword. He says it's for the sake of others, for the sake of the only teacher and friends he wanted to protect. Faye says he has nothing to lose. The man asks if that's true. The girl reports that Faye doesn't have such a person. The girl says that the person for whom he is ready to sacrifice his life is someone important to him. Faye says he doesn't need honor or glory, and he's fine with being a trash prince, but still. The girl stands next to Faye and holds his hand. The girl says it's Your Highness. A girl and a man look in surprise at a guy who says he has changed his mind. He protects the girl from the attack, parrying the blow. The girl informs him that Your Highness should stay close to her. Faye says she will fulfill the request and introduces herself as Faye Hans Deesburg. The knight says he now feels fortunate and realizes that Faye is the Prince of Deesburg. The woman asks him to think again and explains that fighting for this country means fighting until it either wins or falls. Faye says he knows that. Faye says that's understandable. The girl explains that her duty is to protect His Highness and the royal family, but if he asks, she'll gladly cross swords with him. Faye explains that there are many stairs in the castle, and if you take your time, you can climb them easily. She explains that the bird is a dove that brings letters. Faye informs him that if she wins, they'll have to quietly return to Deesburg. Faye says that if he wins, she'll make sure he gets a good night's sleep, as she's planning on taking a long vacation to a hot springs or something. Then they begin the fight, clashing. The girl warns Faye to try to dodge the blow, explaining that the sword isn't suited to his frame. He explains that he's in an unfamiliar body and wielding an unfamiliar sword, acknowledging the danger of the situation. They then continue the fight. Faye explains that his heart and body are a constant battlefield, and one swing equals one kill. Feely asks what that is. He slashes his sword into the ground, causing a powerful explosion of dark energy between him and Faye, who looks on in surprise. Faye explains the bloodline technique, the shadow sword. The girl explains that this sword and asks if it was made with magic. He reveals that the child's ability depends on the bloodline of both parents, causing the child to develop a completely new technique. But if he tells Faye about this, things will be very difficult. He and the girl with the sword engage in battle. Faye says it's a flash. The girl curses. Faye and the girl clash in combat. Faye suddenly leaps toward the girl with the sword in hand. Faye is surprised. Faye strikes with the sword. Faye, with the sword, announces that he has won and asks if there are any objections. The man explains that his skill and feel for the sword have been terribly dulled. He has no grip or weight, and it could break at any moment, and the body of a 14-year-old is too weak. Feli explains that he was simply hiding his true power, and if everyone knew how strong he was, no one would dare call him a trash prince. Yet, he continues to hide his power at the expense of his dignity. Feli asks why now, and Faye explains that he doesn't consider it an honor to use the sword and doesn't think it's noble. He says he wants to fulfill the last wish of the person who made him realize this. Feli asks him not to die and calls him Your Highness. She informs him that if he dies, she will follow him. He explains that he has no intention of dying and adds, in any case, Faye says he only said he'd stay and fight for Phyllis, and the girl confirms this. The man yells at Faye, asking if he understands what he's talking about. The man explains that he's already arranged for Princess Mafia's deportation and asks him not to worry. Someone asks the hero if he can kill him. The girl urgently calls for Your Highness to wake up. The girl says she's opening the door and apologizes. Faye says he has something on his face. The girl explains that she expected something a little different and asks what it looks like, a horse costume or a deer costume. Faye indignantly asks what horse costume means. The girl says it suits him. Faye says she's pleased to hear that. The girl reports that they are under attack, and Lyric has no time to think, to which he explains that according to enemy reports, there are about 25,000 men. He thinks this is their main army and that they want to end this once and for all. The man orders the men to assemble at the gate. The guy announces that they will begin. The man explains that the enemies will attack them at any moment. Faye asks what's wrong with the necklace he asked for, and the girl explains that everything happened too quickly and she'll send one of the soldiers to get it right away. Faye shouts at Mafia and then asks what she's doing here. The girl on the horse looks worried. 3 soldiers report leaving their men to guard the castle so they can escape with Lord Lyric at any moment. The man on the horse yells to stop and complains about his horse. The girl says that even if he loses his head, the war won't end, and asks if he plans to defect to save himself. Faye replies that he hasn't even considered it. Faye reports that a loyal warrior said he wanted to save everyone, the country, the king, and her. Faye explains that it was because he was asked to. Faye says he was a great guy and managed to motivate him, the trash prince. He reports that Phyllis has really good allies. Faye says it's very important to him and asks him to keep it safe. The maid replies that she will. Faye tells the boys to stay here and not let any enemies pass. The man asks Faye and the maid to wait. A group of knights in armor with swords and shields with crosses on them runs forward rapidly, accompanied by a rider on horseback. Faye tells Feli to stay put and suddenly starts off somewhere. He runs towards the advancing soldiers. Several soldiers notice him and react. He hits several soldiers, throwing them back with force. Faye laughs. Several soldiers tell each other that he's laughing. Faye stands with his sword in hand, laughter echoing around him. Several soldiers shout, "Kill him," noting that he's alone and acting quickly. Faye says, "Kill him." He explains that if sword-wielding opponents resist, they must be killed without hesitation, and that warriors who escape from him could become a threat to him in the future. 2 soldiers run towards Faye, screaming for help and asking him to save them. Faye strikes with his sword, killing both of the attackers. He tells them to throw everything away and become a beast. The man on horseback tells them to ignore him, and another man orders them to seize the gates. He orders them to kill, and they must kill. The man with the sword leaps into battle, repeating the order to kill. The soldiers react in panic to the movement of the shadows, one of them saying that the shadows are moving. Faye raises his sword, and dark energy begins to form around it. He shouts, "Kill," then says "Spada," after which a battle ensues in which many soldiers fight and fall, forming a mountain of corpses. The man says Faye isn't thrilled, and he knew this would happen if he picked up a sword. He wanted to stop fighting, but he changed his mind and even went against him. Faye announces that she will kill thousands more people by laughing. The girl says the fake smile is clumsy and addresses the other person as, "Your Highness." Faye says he's said many times that when someone makes that face, it's immediately clear what's going on inside. She says he is not what he thinks. Someone suddenly attacks Faye. Faye reports that his fist didn't break, and the girl looks at him in surprise. The guy says that he dodged, and the girl says that she thought that he would be skewered along with the maid. Faye says that means it's a hero. Aids Farizard appears and says it's a trick of the mind. Faye tells him to go back outside the castle gates. He explains that she'll only get in the way. Eads Fari says she won't let them escape so easily. Faye says fine. An impact is depicted, accompanied by a caption explaining it as a spada punch. Below, a character with long hair is shown being thrown back by the explosion, while another character nearby is bounced off the ground. The woman says it was all a waste of time and that it's a disaster and a sad thing, and Faye says it's interesting and that he can do it after all. Faye explains that he's being underestimated. Then a confrontation occurs. The woman says she didn't notice anything when he did something. He falls to the ground, clutching his hand to his chest. The sound of stomping is heard. Faye says that her bloodline techniques seem to be tied to illusions as well, but it seems like her illusion will be much easier to overcome. Three soldiers say the main thing is to stay out of the way, and one of them declares that he will do everything now. He declares that he will avenge everyone. Then he strikes, impaling the enemy with a spear and knocking him down. The knight screams that Faye is a beast. Faye strikes and kills several knights. The woman with the sword asks how he can fight and says the illusion has worn off. He strikes the armored man, wounding him in the neck, while the girl jumps and watches the scene. He then quickly steps aside. Drops of blood fall to the ground. Faye is silent. FSI reports that the girl failed to kill him after all. Faye calls her a hero. The girl asks why her spell doesn't work on him. Faye explains that screaming is pointless, it only shakes the air and regrets it. The woman says it's the devil. The woman explains that he attacks at the same time as her, and only touch remains. The man says that his illusion still holds, he's still in it, and he can't rely on hearing or sight. The woman says that he understands where she is. Faye strikes with his sword, and the girl deflects it with her own. The girl screams in pain, having been wounded in the shoulder. Faye says he only scratched her slightly, but she's already screaming and asks if she'll give up. The girl replies that Faye knew all along. He says he knew an illusionist before who often complained about how short-lived his illusions were. He explains that the guy could sometimes use illusions on him and still keep a straight face. He says he's right to call himself a hero. The girl asks. Faye says the other rulers won't even dare look at him askance because the kingdom will have a hero and he doesn't mind serving a prince like him. The man asks if Faye is making fun of him. He says he's the third prince of the kingdom of Diesburg, who amazes the entire world with his laziness and worthlessness, and says it's all very simple, you just need to kill him. The man explains that it's all very simple, isn't it? The girl screams at them to back off if that's what they want, and threatens to kill Faye with her trump card, drown him in his own tears, and kill him, ordering him to cry and die. The girl screams, "Remember everything." Faye announces the title of the scene, Illusion of the Past. He looks over his raised hand in surprise. The girl informs him that he won't be able to pass now. He explains that he has no intention of retreating. Faye says he can't afford to lose, and vows to fight to the end. He says, "Oh." The man says that Faye managed to survive today safe and sound, and that it was well done. He remains silent. The woman says she's not going to die and asks him not to worry. The man panics and tries to run away, but the woman smiles and makes a peace sign. Then the woman places her hand on the man's head and tells him he should live. Finally, the woman, with blood on her face and her tongue hanging out, looks forward. Faye says that if he is reborn, he would like to live a quiet life in which he would never have to pick up a sword. Faye's teacher shouts. He says that this time he will kill the teacher, addressing His Highness. The girl, shocked, tries to object. Faye tells him to get up or he'll break his legs, and asks him to kill him. The man explains that he knew the teacher wanted to die, wanted to, but couldn't, and continued to live with his feelings destroyed, so he, laughing cheerfully, the man says he was serious. The girl shouts, "Your Highness." The man with the sword says that this time Faye announces that she will kill the teacher. A man with a weapon and shield notices the shadow expanding and heading this way, then orders the squad of mages to be ready. Another man confirms the squad of mages is ready and says that if they attack, the hero will too. A third man notices the fire and says, the man says they don't need a hero unless he can kill one person and orders them to fire. He says, "Don't interfere." The boy and girl react to what's happening. In the upper right, a man in armor with a sword and shield fends off an attack that causes an explosion on the ground. In the lower right, a woman announces that she has finally met her teacher, but is attacked by something black. In the center, the woman continues speaking, expressing tension. Faye says that all shadows are now under his control. He explains that it doesn't matter whether it's raining or night, his own shadow or someone else's. If he can't kill with one blade, he'll kill with two, and if that still fails, then with three. He reports that we are talking about hundreds of thousands. Faye says there will be tens of thousands of all interfering enemies that will be killed. A woman talks about shadow swords. The woman orders the gates closed. The man and woman demand it be done faster. He says that one swing is one kill. The guy reports that the teacher is showing how tens of thousands of shadow swords carrying killing intent will be released simultaneously, eliminating all interfering opponents. Faye says that besides him and the teacher, everyone who interferes needs to be eliminated. The girl screams that he's crazy and calls him a monster. He reveals the name of the spell, Spada, Shadow Sword, and says he'll kill him. He then raises his sword and releases a multitude of shadow swords that fly toward the enemies, striking them and forcing them to retreat. The group. Faye says that this is the only gratitude he is saved. The girl screams. He says that he can only survive if he kills him, and asks if he still kills him. He calls his interlocutor a monster who has killed thousands, tens of thousands, and shouts, asking if he still wants to kill. He asks for help. Faye says, "Don't you dare beg." The man says goodbye. Faye calls the man a swordsman without dignity and strikes him. He says, "Ah," then reports that there's such a spectacle again. He explains that he's gotten a bit cocky. The woman asks him not to make such a face. Faye explains that King Raric and Princess Mafia, the citizens of Aphilis, and even the soldiers of Diasburg. He asks if he defended, to which the girl replies that he did. Then the girl announces that victory is Aphilis's, and at the bottom it says that this time there is one difference. The young man reports the complete elimination of enemy forces and confirms the death of the enemy hero. The man reports that victory went to Aphilis. The woman says she's leaving the army and returning to the castle. If she's needed, she should be called. The man says yes. Mefia reports that, with the help of a small number of troops, she destroyed the remaining enemies in the country, and the allied army immediately disintegrated. He recounts that even after the signing of the peace agreement, when concluding treaties and reparations, Laric and Mafia did not yield, and the negotiations took place with Aphilis in complete control. The girl says it was a shame to ask, and asks where the maid is. Faye explains that if it's the head maid, she's at a party with the warriors. The man says the maid seems to be keeping an eye on the warriors to make sure they don't have too much fun. Faye asks if they don't like it. The girl asks if she's bothering her and offers to chat for a bit. He replies no, asks if she needs anything, and then says he'll keep her company for a little while. The girl agrees. The girl says that even now, people like her before who understand nothing will look at Faye like trash, and she can't stand it. Then the girl starts to speak, but is interrupted. The man says that they even sent out a silence order and calls Faye Hans Diasburg a hero, explaining. The man says that this must be kept secret from Diasburg, especially as they are our benefactor and friend. The man says that they must protect Faye and his position. The girl says that's what he wanted. Faye says that he's a trash prince, and if she feels grateful to him, she should address him as such. The girl apologizes for her recent rudeness and thanks him for his help, which helped avoid casualties. She introduces herself as Mafia's Y. Aphilis and expresses her gratitude as the country's representative. He says there's no need and thanks him for saving the Aphilis kingdom. The girl says it's better for the sword to remain in this country. Then she explains that she can accept the sword of a knight who has sworn allegiance to the country, but she has a condition. The man asks what the condition is. The girl asks if she can ask the man to dance. The man, holding the sword, says that under the dance. The girl says she and Faye still have things to resolve and suggests they have a real talk at least on their last night, asking if he agrees. Faye says there's still something to resolve. The girl calls Faye Prince Hans Diasburg. Faye goes. The woman says Your Highness in honor, and then shouts Your Highness. The maid says it's already 4 o'clock in the evening and points out that the gentleman fell asleep immediately without even informing His Majesty, asking how much longer he plans to sleep. Faye announces that he's finally returned to Diasburg and will regain the sleep he lost in the affiliation, asking to be woken up tomorrow at. He says that if he wins, they will immediately return to Dispert. The girl says that if she wins, she will take a long vacation and go somewhere like Hot Springs. He says that the girl said so herself. He explains that if he wins, he will guarantee his. Faye asks how the guy made a friend and how he's finding life in Aphilis. The guy explains that it's a little awkward to call her a friend. Bells ring. He asks how the other became so strong and asks him to tell her. The girl says she was jealous of him and asks why she wasn't there, explaining that if she were as strong as he, she wouldn't have let anyone die. Faye says he wants to protect everyone, but he doesn't think he'll be willing to become a beast like him to do so. The girl explains that she yearns to protect others with her sword, and that will boil within her. Faye explains that he'll be hurt every time he doesn't protect someone, even if he becomes stronger. The girl says she still wants to become stronger to protect people. He tells her that her ideal is unattainable. The girl picks up a knife, but says nothing. The boy explains that he wanted to become strong enough to be accepted by his teacher. The girl explains that she wanted to become strong, capable of protecting him, and that's why. Faye explains that he has no right to reject such a wish. The girl says that the sword she holds belonged to her father, and now she is passing it on to someone worthy. Faye says that perhaps this is what he couldn't achieve, and if there are any problems, they can contact him. The girl explains that he will take up the sword for the sake of the people. The man says that, how can he put it? The woman says she will become stronger to protect her. The man says that if these efforts ever bear fruit, he will be glad to see it. The girl says that's why. Faye says this with a smile. The guy says he will be glad if this wish comes true. Faye says it's been a week since the extremely exciting event in Aphilis. He says that peace is still best and continues his lazy life. The top right announces that reveille is at 4 o'clock. Faye says, "Good morning and good evening to Her Highness." The maid explains that even if it's a reward, he's still sleeping too late and warns that this will continue until the head maid returns. Faye. Sometime after getting dressed, the man announces that dinner is ready and addresses Faye, calling him Your Highness. He says that everyone is dining together in the dining room. The man calls Faye. Faye lies in the garden and looks at the sky, explaining that on days when the stars are visible, the positions of the stars in Disturg and Aphilis are slightly different. Faye yawns. The maid announces that lights out is at 11 p.m. and wishes her good night, to which Faye replies, "Good night." He says that if possible, he would like to spend his whole life like this, with a sword, and that this is exactly how he wants to live. He says that he will probably be able to die with a smile. Then he explains that this is why he wants to live another day, no, another week, no, another month, another year, so that this can all continue for another 10. Faye asks if she and Stan could at least learn a little from Guerrilla. When called, they must come immediately. The girl apologizes for disturbing Faye so soon after vacation, and he says, "What are you doing, Your Majesty?" The woman informs Faye that he is being sent away. The man asks. The boy tells Radis that he wants to know how he lost his right arm. The man explains that this injury is his honor. He didn't lose his arm, it was chopped off, and at the time he had a woman he wanted to protect, so for her sake, he gave up his arm and put his life on the line for the woman he loved. Faye says he's a lucky man and asks if that's what the man thinks. He says that someday everyone will have someone they want to protect, and it is for this person that they will be willing to give their life. The man explains that the one against whom you cannot even draw a sword is the one you want to protect. Another man asks if this means Faye already has such a person. The boy tells the girl that she is the girl for whom he wanted to become stronger to protect her, but the woman tells Radis what he needs to do to protect him. Faye turns his attention to what's happening around him. The girl informs him that the Emperor and Duchess Guerrilla are speaking with Faye and are telling him to come see them. She also gives Faye souvenirs. The girl says she's already installed devices on the windows and doors, but they're useless. The man shouts that he finally has a day off and won't be disturbed, then abruptly bursts into the room. The girl warns him not to dare do that in someone else's room. Faye says he won't let himself get caught again and calls the girl naive. He explains that, having realized the opportunity, he made a small window while Faye was on vacation so that when pressed, it would fall out along with the frame. The girl is surprised that the window doesn't fall out and asks why, Faye declares. The girl says she's doing a little stretching while cleaning the window. He says he doesn't understand what's going on. The woman calls Faye and offers to go with him. The inscription says a week has passed. The man explains that Linzel is a land of water, drawing abundant resources from a vast ocean and being a friendly country bordering Diasburg. Faye says she doesn't understand why he needed to come here, and the girl asks. He announces that he has received an invitation to the third prince's birthday party and reminds her that he is engaged to the first princess of the Linzels. He explains that he needs to assist his father in state affairs in place of his older brother. He says that he will ask Feli to accompany him, as he has other matters to attend to. The man tells Faye to surrender and explains that he gave him permission to take him along if it would calm him down, and suggests they have fun together, as he cares for Faye like an older brother. The girl asks the man if he agreed with that statement, to which the man replies that he understands. The man tells the girl. The man says it's the Diasburg Knight's attire. The man says he's still not getting any bites, and that fishing in a river or lake is different from fishing at sea. Faye asks if the fish are biting, and the man replies, absolutely not. The woman says that if that's the case, then everything is fine, and invites the man to sit down, noting the pleasant breeze. The man asks if that's true, and inquires if he carries a sword, addressing him with a respectful title. Faye reports that at King Laric's request, it was forbidden to speak of it in all territories, even to the soldiers of Diasburg, and since their return, they haven't carried it with them in the castle, as if hiding it from their highnesses and his majesty. Faye explains that if the man says that in any case, he's honored to be useful as a knight, and so the fishing was worth it. He adds that in that case, the girl shouts that she's leaving, the guy asks her to wait, and the girl leaves. The guy asks him to leave her, and the girl agrees. The man says that. Faye explains that from the very beginning, he found it strange that there were over 100 people accompanying him, half of whom had returned from Aphilis. He says that his brother probably understood that this country was dangerous. Faye says that his older brother never forced him to do anything, but someone told him. He says that the one the elder brother trusts, who can easily silence the accompanying knights and knows him well, there is only one person who fits the description. The girl says that she was the one who advised His Highness Goria to take Faye with him and is ready to accept the punishment for it. Faye explains that they're different from other countries, but it's normal for other countries to have one or two heroes around them, and in the event of a battle, heroes are needed as weapons. Greyro asks if that's what the girl thought, and she explains that if she's present, she can protect her brother, even if something happens. He says, "Don't die." He explains that this is the sword he took up to protect people, and as long as it is in his hands, he will be able to protect his brother and his girlfriend. The girl says that she will not forgive if Faye decides to die, and Faye explains that this is why. The girl says that besides, he explains that when he swings his sword, he kills enemies and no one will treat him like trash. He says that he's gone and will wait for her downstairs so she can eat in peace. Faye is surprised and finds it strange that he saw Tiara in Philly because their appearance, personality, and even strength are completely different. The man declares that he loves her. He says that she had a naive character and loved to play around and also showed great love to him and the teacher. He says that it's good that she was able to protect him and confesses her love. The boy explains that he might see that scene again, and no matter how far he's come, he'll still be a trash prince, and that in the past, present, and future, he's painted a hellish picture, a mountain of corpses. Faye explains that he won't let the people he loves die on him again. The guy says that since they're close friends, he wanted to tell her in advance. He asks if he heard. The guy explains that Linzel is starting a war. A week earlier, a man reports that the city is outside the castle. The guy asks if anyone's there. The man greets him and says he's been gone for a while. The guy confirms the flowers are the same as always. Faye says she wants to ask something and names the 7 licorice flowers. And also, the text block explains that in his previous life he was the Sword Emperor, and in this life he's a trash prince. The image shows him sitting on a sofa holding a bouquet of flowers. The title indicates that this is Chapter 11, titled The Land of Water. The second Prince of Wales, May Linzel, greets and thanks him for his journey, inviting him to make himself at home. Faye asks Gregory to introduce himself to her younger brother. He reveals his full name, Heinz Diesberg. The man says he is the brother he constantly hears about from Guerilla. Faye says that if he abdicates, Faye will come again. Faye asks, "Will you become king?" The man says, "Yes, for now." The man explains that the elder brother is not suited for politics, and although they say the younger brother is more suited than he is, it means little. The man explains, he asks Wales to hold his tongue and stop speaking recklessly in front of his younger brother, a member of the royal family, and says that he asks this as a friend. Wales explains that while he has the opportunity, he must ensure that this does not harm Diesberg, since he, as ruler, has. Faye says, it's already decided. Faye explains that no matter how many times it happens, his decision won't change. Faye says this in response to the other man, who says he's still talking about that event. Florist Wallach explains that Linzel has only 5 heirs, 3 princes and 2 princesses, and that he was there 5 years ago. He says he only learned this from someone who knows Linzel well and says he's overrated, Florist Wallach explains. The woman reports that the killer was a radical from the kingdom of Sadans, after which a war with Sadans began, during which the family feud ceased, and that in the end, Linzel demanded compensation in the form of territories, and everything ended. The woman explains that she was carrying. Faye reports that he heard from an acquaintance that the current Linzel is a bit dangerous, and warns them to be careful if they go there. He explains that when viewed from this perspective, the second prince is often thought of as a cruel man, but in reality, he is someone who cares for his family and is insightful. The prince says that since he's a prince, this isn't just his problem, so his actions had limitations that continued to hold him back, and finally, he'll be able to take revenge. The man listens. The man says that a loss that becomes a source of pride is something a person will later talk about with a smile. Faye says that if the other person decides to start a war, then as long as it doesn't harm them, he won't stop them. He explains that if the other person wants him to. He explains that if he needs help, he will certainly help as a friend, but in other cases he will not expose himself, and this is how a prince should act, as well as the true form of Gregory Haynes Diesberg. The man asks if he can help his brother and if he is his friend, to which he replies. Faye says it's going to rain, so he'll wait and asks her to tell him when she feels like it. He then tells her he's planning a walk tomorrow and invites her to go with him, suggesting they go out and eat something delicious. The other guy agrees. In the upper right corner, a door creaks. In the center right corner, a man falls, surrounded by shadows, and the name of the move Spada, Shadow Sword, is heard. In the lower left corner, he reports that the man couldn't sleep, so he went out and asks if there's anything like a garden around here. At the top, the boy says they're going to the sea. The man explains that yesterday's night, the man explains that he really is their trash prince. He was recently in the garden with the head maid. The boy asks what he is. The man asks who it is and notices that he's wearing a doctor's coat. The man says to relax, as it is already in the past. Faye suggests to enjoy fishing now. The man confirms this. The man says there's a small country beyond the sea. He tells her that 5 years ago, something happened to Linzel. The man asks what lands exactly. He explains that he heard Linzel demand compensation in the form of lands. The man clarifies which lands. He asks if it's known. The woman reports that Sadens claimed the Linzel royal family wanted the island, and the queen committed suicide. The man explains that the Sadens kingdom asked the empire for protection due to the empire's interference, so Linzel was forced to refuse compensation. Faye asks. He says that if so, then it's a trick of the imagination. The man says that yes, not bad. He asks what? The man says that's clear. Faye says he was quite energetic in that battle. The man says the sword suits Faye very well. He says he'd be happy to talk to Faye, that he'd heard rumors about Faye and was eager to meet him. The man explains he's a little late introducing himself and introduces himself as Roel Zuberk, the owner of the shop. The guy asks if this is the immortal Roel. Faye explains that it's just a nickname, but he's also called a hero. The woman asks Prince Faye to have a good evening, and he says that he will look forward to their next meeting. Faye looks out the window and reports that her older brother is watching over her younger brother nearby. He says that these are the records of Svarga Volga and asks if it's called The Rainbow Flower and the Truth About It. He explains that these are, apparently, the most truthful records, and tells how 200 years ago, many heroes and knights were gathered to save the Queen of the Kingdom of Romania, including. Faye reports feeling like the writing style is unnatural, like it was written like a cheap pulp novel. The girl says she's read them before too. The woman explains it's just a rumor, but Faye says she really did feel that way. The man explains what he expected from the old woman and exclaims that he fell. The woman explains that if there were a flower capable of curing illnesses, then most likely at least stories would have remained among people. The girl asks him not to think about going looking for this flower, because if you go there, the girl informs him that if His Highness Gregoria falls ill, they will immediately go to his aid. The boy replies that he doesn't deny it. Faye says that he will also act for her sake and isn't worried. The girl expresses surprise. The man turns to Faye, says he's forgiven him for interrupting the conversation, and is now leaving. He explains that they've been here a long time, and it's almost noon. The man explains that Princess Moebia has also arrived, and Faye confirms and explains that Moebia introduced him to the local librarian. The guy says he's passing by. He asks who's there, Mebia or Rishan. Faye announces that it's him. He explains that Mebia showed him a nice shop and offers him a gift. The man says he's not surprised to see a guest wandering around the castle at this hour and notes that he's not in the mood, advising him to grab a glass and return to his room. The man explains that it seems. The woman explains that what she brought wasn't just information. Even the flower couldn't completely cure the cause of the illness, and after a long time, the disease was inherited. The man explains that a month ago, his younger brother who had fallen ill was struck down by the disease, and he explains that your older brother and... The man says he's the island's heroic survivor, the immortal Roel. He explains that several decades ago, Roel traveled to the demonic island and returned, becoming the island's only living witness for the past 200 years. The man explains that Roel's ability to become immortal. Faye says that even if the Satan's kingdom is defeated, its patron, the Empire, will have justification to start a war with Linzel. The Empire has several heroes who, he believes, have already managed to destroy several countries. He explains that if a war breaks out, Linzel will have no. He yells that he already told him to shut up, grabbing the other guy by the collar. The guy explains that he was thinking about other options so much that he thought he was going to die, and says that ever since the day Roel returned, he's been in a state where he feels like he's about to die. Faye thinks that even when his mother died, he shamelessly thought he'd finally found a way. He says that even then his mind stopped him when his younger brother also fell ill. Faye screams that there are no more ways and he's decided not to let his brothers die. The man tells Grary that if he opens again. The man says there are no other options. He says to cool his head, you idiot. The guy reacts to this with surprise. Faye says they need to continue avoiding war and address their lack of military power. He explains it's simple. Then Faye reveals that Wales has him and offers to take him with them. The guy explains that if he enters, he'll be able to take the permitted number of soldiers with him. Besides, he was told he'd become a hero, and he says he won't say he's enough, but he can help. The man says, don't talk nonsense. Faye informs him that if he marries Moebia, they will become his brothers, and explains that his father is not the type to blame another country for his negligence, and besides, there are 2 more princes in the dynasty. He explains that although both are smarter than him, They keep their distance and therefore do not want to. He says he wants to give him a purpose and be where he will be, so he can't and won't die. The man explains that it's not worth ruining others so easily and calls Faye a fool. Faye tells him to make it regret without remorse. Guerrilla asks for help and says he needs help. Faye says yes. Guerrilla grabs Faye's clothes with force. Faye smiles. He says that he's still better than him, so he didn't want to talk about it. The man asks if everything is really okay and if they won't abandon their younger brother. He says that's what he planned from the very beginning and explains that if he's with his younger brother, everything will be fine. The woman says that it's not yet possible to leave him alone, but he seems to be gradually changing, and Faye says that at this time it's better for Feli to be with him, not him. The man with the cup apologizes if anyone thought she would go with them, to which the other man replies that she wouldn't. This same man explains. He says that it's a reason to live, right? He explains that, and in general, what is it? Faye says that in the end, nothing has changed. He explains that now he too has people he wants to protect, but even so, that won't be a reason to live, and he's afraid of losing the people important to him if he survives. Faye says he'd like to die easier than he did then, to die with gratitude. He says that no matter how much he thinks, all that comes to mind is death, and he can't think of a single reason to live. He says that he still promised to protect, decided not to let him die, so... The girl turns to Faye, informing him that more than 3 hours have passed. She realized he's not in the room and asks where he's been. Faye tells the girl to stop guarding him. The girl calls Faye by name and asks what he's talking about. Faye explains that he doesn't need protection. The girl says she can't, turning to a member of the royal family. He says she has no right to refuse. Faye says he doesn't need the girl. He explains that if he doesn't say anything, even if he tells his brother to take her with him, it will be useless, and it seemed like he had no intention of taking the girl to the island. Faye acknowledges his strength of purpose and says he needs to separate the girl from him. A girl strikes a man. The man says he refuses. The girl explains that she is weak and of no use to His Highness, but asks him not to get carried away. The girl says he's too arrogant, Your Highness. Faye reacts silently to her words. The girl says that if she is allowed, she will show Her Highness her strength this time, as she has decided to protect him. The man listens attentively. The girl says that everything is all right. The man says that it is. The man stands behind, holding a sword. The girl says everything is as they said. Faye says there's no need to be so naive and calls her a brat. He reports that the art of the Resievnaya Spada shadow sword will be suitable here. Faye says, "Take it." The girl looks up. Faye is standing on a dark mass that rises up with them. Dark tentacles are depicted in the upper left, and below is a picture of Faye and the girl landing on the ground. The girl says she's put away the blade. He says she doesn't have to hold back and use magic since she said she'd show off her abilities, and orders her to attack with all her might. He explains that anyone who admits defeat or touches the ocean will lose, he tells. The girl says Faye said he's too proud. Faye explains that he understands he's not strong, but he still has to overcome it to keep the girl and his brother from dying. He says that if you're going to defeat him, then try to prove that he's weak. The man says his name is Von Justinius. The man grips the hilt of his sword. The woman says she will use force to show how strong she is. Faye says he understands and addresses the woman as Her Highness Faye Hayes Disberg. He announces that he'll attack first. The girl casts a spell. He notices that she's fast. They clash in combat. The girl explains that it's nothing like what happened in Aphelis, and he says that it's... The woman reports that with the addition of spiritual arts, her magical and physical powers have become stronger, and Faye explains that she originally wielded a blade above the night level. Faye and the woman engage in combat, with Faye attempting to fend off the woman's attack. The girl says that the water flow is a backwash. He says, huh, and explains that this is the difference between heroes. He says that this is the level of someone who has reached the level of a hero and protected her older brother, and calls this Faye's true strength. He says that it seems he will be the one who... Faye says, fa, and tells him to laugh several times. Then he yells, bend, attacking with a powerful blow. The girl announces God by directing a stream of water forward. The girl reports that it's hard. The man watches the explosion. Faye reports that he attacked from above. The girl strikes with a bat. The man announces a roundhouse kick and delivers a powerful kick that sends the girl flying backwards. The girl makes a pain sound, falls to the ground, and tries to get up, sliding across the surface. She says it's hard. Then the girl with long hair and a bow on her head says the word whoa and looks at the sword. No information. Faye says she understands, which doesn't mean he hasn't considered her thoughts about His Highness Goraria, and explains that she must obey orders as the head maid to protect the royal family. The girl explains that she has served the royal family since the previous generation. The girl says she can't leave you alone. He says he might hurt you. The girl explains that if she doesn't do this, she won't be able to stop him, so she'll gladly inflict wounds. She then says she doesn't know what's causing the Highness to suffer or torment him. Faye says she wants to save them and everything will be fine, even if it's not him. The girl explains that she just wants them to believe that salvation exists. He says that maybe it's not fair, but it's also part of his power. Faye asks for the water dragon. The water dragon is revealed, and Faye's resolve stands in its way. He says it will scorch the body. The man asks if she removed it and notices that it has disappeared on its own. The girl explains it's water. The man dodges the explosion. The girl calls him baby. The girl tells him not to mock this child. Faye notices that the pressure is unusual for him and his eyes are a deep azure color and says so. The girl says that even among elves there are only a few who are capable of this, and it's no exaggeration to say that she is the only one, and also says that it's good that he knows about it. He explains that he doesn't have to hold back if that's the case. The girl explains that, apparently, the one who will lose. The girl says that's true. Faye says that's a convenient interpretation. The girl says the word water and shoots jets of water at Faye. Faye dodges the girl's attack, and she continues to advance. He says that the enemy is too fast. He only dodges, not having time to move his arms and legs, and takes aim. The girl screams that the blow is aimed at her neck. Faye reports that the guy escaped serious injury but adds that there's more. The guy says the girl won't leave and strikes her. A young man stabs another man in the stomach. Then a projectile is fired and explodes. The girl explains that she thought she'd throw him into the sea, but he avoided the trajectory and asks if he wouldn't have jumped back in that situation. The girl says that this is the ability of the relic. Faye reports that it's a spot shadow sword. The girl explains that Faye probably got up and says that these wounds are such that an ordinary person's insides would rupture and his ribs should break and he shouldn't be able to move normally due to the pain. Faye explains that he was taught that the most. The woman says that Faye was taught arrogantly. He asks if she's truly human and says he has no plans to stop being human. He and the woman simultaneously shout the spells Weak Cleave and Inspiring Wave. Then a powerful explosion occurs. The girl says that it's impossible to use something like that now. She explains that his aim is up, and the guy says that he missed and down. Faye says ligaments. He casts a spell to summon a shadow link. The girl jumps back sharply. The girl says it's a binding sword and says what it is right away. The man says it's all over now. The girl yells at the man to come. Faye says shadow sword, stormy heel, and water shaft. The girl screams, "Oh, you!" The girl says she can't let Faye go, and he declares he won't give up. They begin to fight, striking each other with swords, causing destruction in the process. Their battle continues with intense attacks and clashes, causing destruction and raising dust and stones. A woman screams as she's thrown out of the water, and the man looks at her. Faye watches tensely. The woman falls to the ground. Faye announces that she's lost. He says who won this fierce battle. Faye falls into a pit after a powerful explosion. He sits up, looking around. The girl says he hit her and calls it amazing. He says that everything is full of contradictions, so he wants to escape this contradiction and asks not to think because there is no answer. Then he explains that he is a trash prince, a shitty person who is incapable of helping and does not know what compassion is. He explains that even if someone is sad, the girl says she doesn't understand what kind of blood relationship this is. Faye says he doesn't want to ignore this feeling because he is still human. He then says he's not dead yet and adds that he's not dead yet. He says he's sorry for keeping you waiting. Faye says nothing. He says he's seeing this form for the first time in a long time and asks how long it's been. The woman explains it's been a long time since His Highness Grelia. The woman apologizes. She explains about the treatment. The elf thanks him, says everyone will be waiting for her, and asks him to take care of himself. He says he will try to live up to their expectations. The elf tells Faye that he will go to her, noting that His Highness Grelia should be awake by now. He addresses her as yours. Faye reports that so. He says he will call it a strategic meeting. Faye says it's the original. The girl nods in response. He says he has one question. The second prince of Linzel, Wells May Linzel, asks if there's anything else, and if not, suggests not wasting time. The man asks to wait. Faye explains that because of this dagger, because of its blackness, he sees in it a colossal amount of murderous lust and malice. He says he doesn't know where the girl got this man from, and it's obvious now that they aren't hostile towards him. The girl asks if he can remove him or leave right now. The guy says the three of them will distract the mid- and high-level monsters, and they need to hold out until Linshi and Zerum return. The girl asks if Faye will participate, and he confirms, saying that's what he said after all. Faye declares he won't be useless. The man says this is the shopping district of the royal capital of Linzel, and explains that next to the slums, the second branch on the left, the third door from the end of the alley, that's where he's looking. He asks him to return quickly. The man calls Faye, Your Highness. The guy says the other clearly doesn't understand how to beg for mercy, and the man asks what he's saying. The man explains the name of the move, the shadow sword spaza. The men strike, accompanied by splashes of dark liquid. Faye says he seems a little different, and asks if he really thinks the weapon he's hiding can kill him. The guy asks what it is, and says it's you. He says he's the third prince of the kingdom of Diesburg, Hens Diesburg. The man, shocked, repeats that it's you, that he's the prince, and calls him the third prince. Faye explains that the owner isn't always here and won't show up without an appointment. He then reveals that there are 3 addresses listed and says they'll have to wait. The man asks, wait for what? And expresses displeasure, asking if Faye is willing to just sit and wait, and suggests he go home. Faye replies that she understands. He explains that it's just a man's name, and that the guy called her the owner, to which he agrees. The almighty merchant, Deborg Zarek, explains that no matter who it is, be it royalty or aristocrats, those who come here without an appointment pay in advance. The woman says she understands, then says the other person is an idiot, and asks if an idiot who doesn't understand common sense and logic can deal with her. The woman says that merchants don't enter into business unless they see a profit, and asks if there's any point in sending their men along with a man who's so eager to die. She calls the man pathetic and claims that everything he says is aimed at getting them a ship. The woman explains that. In the top right panel, Faye says that this is all the man has. In the panel below, on the left, the man states that he truly has nothing. In the top left panel, a group of people watch the scene, accompanied by a message that this is a natural reaction. In the bottom center, it says that if you are a man, you should. The man says he should never forget to control himself. The girl explains that while he's alive, he should value his friends more than jewelry and liquor, and believes that's what matters most. He says he's proud to be a friend of a man, even one like him, and asks her not to dwell on it too much. Faye tells him what it means. The girl says she will always protect him. He then says, okay. The girl says she'll be waiting for it. The man explains that all that remains are regrets, and even if he went back in time, nothing would have worked out, and what was missed will never return. He laughs. Faye says that's all he has, and explains that, unfortunately, he's never had the chance to conduct a proper negotiation. The man reveals that he's the trash prince of disturbers. Faye explains that she knows what's going on, and calls the man a big idiot who only knows how to swing a sword. He says he understands that what he said was stupid and that such a thing can't be bought in one lifetime. He knows he's smug and self-assured. Then he slams his hand down on the table. Faye says that he promised to go there anyway, so he can't give up now, and he can't die because they are important to him, and he wants them to survive. He asks for help. He says that he is obliged to protect them. A man, a woman, and an elderly man silently watch what is happening. The girl tells Faye to go, and he replies, yes. Faye says, Your Highness Gralia. He says he feels unwell in crowded places, and the man says he feels unwell too. The girl explains that even though they were told they could do whatever they wanted until they left, she doesn't know what to do. She says she was supposed to go to the castle with them. The woman asks if Mr. Rowe. Faye explains that this dagger is truly important to the girl. The girl says she's heard a lot of talk about it from Prince Grelia and her brother, and that her sister went to greet him, but he didn't show up. The woman says she's also curious about something. The man explains that. The woman explains that His Highness was warming himself upstairs and must have gone home. He says he'll go to him. The girl says there's more at the market and freezes, noticing something. The woman notices her eyes. He explains that the inner part of the market is full of stalls selling. The woman says it's the same. The man says he has white hair. The man asks if something happened and apologizes. Faye thanks her for the delivery. The woman says the counter is in the way and she won't make it in time. The girl says she's using it. The woman apologizes to His Highness. The woman screams. The man and girl look at her. Faye says she can't let them leave and tries to hold back the girl who's trying to break free. The girl jumps back, and Faye looks at her. He says he understands this, as they noticed it with the help of Princess Linshin's ability. The girl says that Zarum was in such a hurry to get here too, and asks if they didn't work together perfectly. Rawl says they were well prepared. The man apologizes to Rawl for knocking him down. Faye says he even thought for a second they were trying to kill him, and that the girl really scared him. The girl says she knew the book was sharp, but not that sharp. The girl asks what. The man asks her to forgive him. He announces that everyone is ready and assigned and invites everyone to board the ship. Then he says it's time to set off. Faye announces that they are heading to Devil's Island. He says he has no chance against it and that it's madness. He says that this is the center of the island and that at least one place, at least something, is there. He explains that nowhere in the literature does it say there are ruins on the island. He says that these are ruins and that it is undoubtedly him. Faye reports that after landing, the ship needs to be taken outside the bay. He says the air in this place doesn't feel like a battlefield, but it's the air alone that makes your blood run cold. The man tells them not to forget their mission as they're already rushing here. He and the man notice something approaching, and the man asks what it is. The man explains that the island is surrounded by large, invisible. The girl says that if one of them dies, they need to fire 2 shots, and they will try to take them, and also asks to shoot as far away from the corpse as possible. The guy with the hood tells the girl, roll, to do this first. The girl says the name Ava. The guy with the hood addresses the Bess. Faye says to go. The girl warns Faye's brother to be careful. He reports that it is approaching, and the man orders them to get ready. The man explains that it is not a dragon, but a bird. He warns Your Highness to be careful when the bird attacks. Faye says he has enough power to defeat the enemy. He casts a spell, causing the water to swirl. Faye explains that he will create water rings. Another character confirms his words. He says that the enemy has very good reflexes, but he just needs to touch him. Faye announces the name of the technique Gravity Force. Faye looks at the dragon. The dragon roars and tries to rise, making sounds like K, K. He strikes his opponent with a spear. He says the word bam. The woman says she needs it harder and more. The woman says no. Faye says not yet. The man watches silently. He announces that they will arrive soon. A man with a sword and a man in armor are ready for battle. The hero reports that this is a member of a tribe that lived in the most terrible place on the continent. He explains that this creature with an immense thirst for blood is a vampire. Faye says he's not going to give up and says he'll fight to the end. The man explains that if he loses, he'll die, but if he wins, he'll be able to continue his journey. He says that otherwise he will die. He strikes, but the opponent parries it. He is surprised and says that the opponent did not have time to draw his sword. The opponent laughs and asks if he intended to kill him right away. Faye says everything is great, just great. The man tells her to run to the bay. The man talks about gravity. Then the moment of a powerful impact is shown, causing the earth to collapse. The girl and he scream, trying to stop what's happening. The man declares that he is above Highness Graelia. The man strikes Faye in the chest, piercing him completely. He watches in surprise. The man prepares for the next blow. Faye says it's nothing, and slashes her sword at the chains holding the large rocks together, causing them to shatter and fall. He punches a man with a sword, who deflects the attack with a shield. The man says it won't work. The woman says, treat him. The girl informs him, His Highness Prince Grelia. Faye explains that his lung is punctured, such a wound, but his magic. Faye tells Kei-Su. He tells her not to use it without his command, and reminds her that he's already told her about it. The man explains that there was no other option, and that there's no need to complain every time. Faye tells him that 10 years have passed, and the guy hasn't changed at all, and says that there are many more people than them. The guy says he's wondering if it was worth it, and laughs, saying that Faye has come again to lose to him. Faye explains that so many of the guy's friends have died, and even his fighting spirit has been determined. He speaks well. Then he explains that the other person is only thinking about the place and doesn't even try to hide it. Faye says he hopes his interlocutor is prepared for what awaits him. Then he laughs and explains that even if he holds a grudge against his interlocutor, he hasn't lived so long away from human eyes. For that reason, this is a chance to receive His Highness's blessing. Then Faye strikes. He says, ha, he hits the man. The man says, great, bam. The man says, that's all. The man grabs Faye by the throat. He looks at the man with blood coming out of his mouth. The man looks at Faye. Faye says, the little guy, explaining that he crushed his throat and broke his neck, and says that a normal person in his place would have died by now. The man grins and prepares for battle. Faye and the man simultaneously lunge at each other. He says he can't believe this is happening and announces that he's not going to give up. He then moves forward sharply, preparing to attack. Faye says this drug is hard to take when you've lost your arms, and asks when he'll give in and try to crawl away. The man says the other man hasn't changed at all. The man is glad he figured out what Faye was doing and thinks he should break the other drugs. Faye asks if it will be. He delivers a powerful blow to the man, who is seriously injured and flies back. The man says he will still be a piece of shit even in 100 years. Faye says that when entering a fight, there's always a way out, win or die. Then he notices the poison and asks where it came from. The man explains that he'd been planning this for a long time and that killing Faye was part of the plan. Faye explains that he's an immortal hero and that's not enough to kill him. The man. He says that he has become an enemy to him and laughs. He explains that it is he who calls it a fight, offering to try. He says that he is steadfast and that he is the Isomnic and calls for him to kill him. Then he and the other man fight using chains. The man in the cloak looks at. Faye says that first of all, Robert is too arrogant and shouldn't tell him where to go. Robert yells that he told them to run and calls Faye stupid, then explains that if he can't take the drug, they need to leave because they need to use their power to the fullest, otherwise it's pointless. He says that relying only on oneself is not normal, and this is not his personal battle. He explains that we can't run away forever, not just him, and that everyone must give him a fight. The man says that he is ready too. The guy who saved this trash from death asks how it works. The man. Faye says she'll help and warns him not to try to argue. Faye explains that the other has a grudge against him, and the other replies that he has a grudge against himself for being worthless here. Faye says she'll kill him and names the magical chains. The other asks for forgiveness for that. The woman tells Faye to be bound with magical chains. The man with the sword attacks Faye with the chains. The man with the chains asks if that's all. The man with the sword tightens the chains around Faye, who is wounded and has blood on his face. Faye dodged the attack. He counters. The opponent says Faye dodged and that he's doing a good job of reading his movements. He throws a kick. The man parries it. He and the man simultaneously attack the other man, who parries their blows. The man announces that this is the end. He laughs. The man and he look at each other. Faye reports that this poison is not bad. The man reports that the bleeding won't stop and asks what kind of poison it is. He says it kills even dragons instantly and laughs that it's time to change, and also says that we've had enough of playing around. The guy warns that you need to be careful, Your Highness, and asks if. Faye says he can even kill a dragon. The man shouts for Magi and tries to stop what's happening, asking Faye not to move. The man warns Faye not to let himself be hurt and says he has a cure that only he can use. Faye replies that it's lifeless. He says all that is unnecessary, all that is needed in battle is the desire to kill. The man with the sword asks if he really thinks he can hit from such a distance. The woman warns to be careful. The man says, "Damn it." The woman says they won't make it in time. The man warns to be careful. Faye says she won't let him die, and the man addresses Faye as, "Your Highness." The man apologizes, and Faye jumps back. Faye asks what's going on and notices a knife stuck in her back. He says that the head maid is. The man says that the spa. The girl answers, clarifying yes. Faye delivers a powerful blow, causing an explosion and destruction on the ground. He then explains that it's a kind of talisman. He says away. The girl screams rawly. He strikes the enemy with his sword. In the top panel on the right, a man is breathing heavily after an explosion. In the bottom right, a man and a girl attack an enemy simultaneously, the man screaming and the girl calling him a beast. In the bottom left, a man grabs the enemy's face, and in the bottom right, a man and a girl strike, breaking the enemy's sword. Faye strikes the armored man, causing both to fall to the ground, causing the wall to collapse. The girl screams that it's Prince Wells. Faye asks what happened and why she can't attack again, advising her to try using spiritualism since she's a priestess. The girl replies that she can't, because. He strikes and knocks the girl down. The girl falls onto the rocks, and several people watch in shock. A woman says it's the head maid, and the other two women panic and scream, "No," expressing fear. Faye says that then he'll kill the weakling first. The man shouts, "Grelia." The girl says, "Your Highness." The man, with the last of his strength, utters, "X." A guy asks a girl if she likes stars, and the girl silently looks away. Faye says, does he want to watch it together? He says that's a weird reaction and suggests they watch it together. Faye agrees and says yes. He says he hasn't finished counting them yet. He then kicks the ground near his opponent's hand. Faye strikes with her sword. The man leaps forward with his sword, heading toward the two standing people. The girl looks on in surprise. The man with the wound on his face watches. The man with the wound on his chest looks forward. The man suddenly draws his sword. Faye prepares for battle with concentration. He strikes the man, who is thrown back. The man reports being cut. Faye screams Papada, attacking with dark energy. Then there's an explosion. Faye stands up, protecting another man tied up and sitting on the ground. The man with the disheveled blonde hair asks how the other man got here. The girl demands an answer, and the man with the disheveled blonde hair. He says he felt like he could lose them too. He asks why and explains that it's because he wants to protect them and asks if that's not clear. The man and woman look on in surprise. The man smiles, and below, a man is shown lying among the stones. Faye strikes a blow aimed at the flying dragon. The girl asks Faye to forgive her, and the boy begs him to let her go. The man shouts for him to stop, and Faye calls out the girl's name. He says that the deadly technique is his body and soul, which are the battlefield. In the next scene, he and the man fight, delivering powerful blows to each other. Faye says, "Ha!" and orders another one to come out. The other guy says yes, another one came out. Then they engage in combat, their swords clashing. He says, Spada, then announces that it's the same thing again and that there's no art. The man with the sword looks at what's happening with surprise. Faye says, kill. The man reports that the shadow control has fallen asleep. The boy laughs and makes a noise, and the man strikes, causing a powerful impact. The man and boy engage in combat. The man delivers a powerful blow, and the boy prepares to retaliate. The man, smiling, attacks the boy holding the sword. Faye says, oh shit. He delivers a powerful blow, causing a huge explosion and the rock to shatter. The man runs forward with a smile, attacking his opponent. He tells her what to do. The man says that he said it again, that's why he says he's weak. He laughs and says that he can't, confirming the man's words. Then he laughs out loud. Faye explains that if you change the shape of your body, your shadow will change, and this is a fusion of body and shadow. He explains that if you change the shadow, your body will change. Faye explains that she's doing this. The man asks what Faye is doing and wonders what would happen if she did the opposite. He says that his shadow remembers the times when he survived in that hellish world, so he needs to return to me from that time. Faye says he is not going to give up and that he will fight until the end. He looks forward with a serious expression. His hand holding the sword is shrouded in dark shadows. He states that he cannot afford to lose because if he loses, he will die. Then he stands with the sword in his hand, and a dark figure appears next to him, which Faye says he can't afford to lose and strikes him with his sword. Faye then steps on the ground and stares ahead with concentration. He quickly reports that he has changed and applied the skill to his body. He strikes with his sword, the man parries it and strikes back. He says that this is not enough and laughs. The man made a sound of displeasure and lunged. Faye says everything is just wonderful and what a beautiful day. He then says that after crossing blades with his interlocutor, he realized he was just like him. He says that until he crushes the enemy, he will not be satisfied. Then he asks if the other person truly wants to protect them and whether the word protect is hiding a desire to kill. Faye says that this trash wasn't an interesting opponent and laughs at the fact that someone says protect, clarifying that they probably meant destroy rather than protect. He then asks if that's true. The next scene shows Faye standing surrounded by dark tentacles. He explains that he understands perfectly well that his sword is soaked to the limit with blood and is the sword of death, and that he had to do something to protect the boys, but he was unable to protect the people dear to him. He says that this sword is all he can do, and that no matter how disgusted he is, even if it is. The boy raises his sword, pierced by an arrow and shrouded in dark energy. Faye tells him he must die, but to protect what is dear to him. The girl says she will wait. The man explains that he must. The text block calls the man a teacher. He says he has no right to say he can't, and that this time he will definitely be able to protect them, dispelling any doubts. The man says he doesn't plan to play with the other person, and the woman tells him to laugh while he can. A guy calls another a dumb maniac. Faye says he looks more like a maniac and explains that before a fight to the death, it's best to introduce yourself, asking for your name. The man calls himself Faye Hans Diesberg. The guy notes that the name is a bit long, but not bad, and repeats Faye's name. Werner says his name is Werner, and orders you to remember this name until you die. Faye says he can't afford to be weak, because weakness means death, and he must become stronger to protect those he cares about. He explains that his sword isn't just a weapon, but a part of his soul, and he will fight until his last breath. He explains that no matter how much he cuts the blades, new ones still appear, and asks if these blades are infinite. He explains that all shadows are at his command, and he can create swords as long as there are shadows. In the top panel, he attacks another man, slashing with his sword. Faye says she can't tell anything about the other man's sword, and his magic circles and monsters are getting smaller and smaller. Faye yells that he shouldn't be underestimated and attacks, shouting, "Ha!" He says that if there are few monsters, then you just need to call more. He says that he will not allow this to happen and orders them to kill. He shouts, "Spada," and the monsters receive multiple wounds from arrows. The man says that this is starting to irritate him. He looks with a tense expression on his face. Faye explains that he understands perfectly well, but the other fights not to protect those behind him, but for the sake of the ghosts. He asks if there were anyone he couldn't protect, and says that's sad. Faye then says that the other is haunted by the past and the memories of those long dead. He tells them to get rid of them, and that such emotions have no place in a fight to the death. He asks if the other man loved them that much, and then suggests going after them. The other man shouts, "Don't you dare despise those who fight of their own free will." He demands they shut up. The man asks what's wrong. Faye says that then, what is he living for the dead or for some imaginary redemption? He strikes with his sword, causing a powerful explosion of energy that rises up and spreads out to the sides. Faye explains that this is a blood blade barrier, and the invisible blades will attack as long as the enemy has blood. Faye tries to fend off the attacking blades and tells the devil when the blades fall. He explains that it is like a space made of blood and reports that his attacks do not have time to reach. Faye says the guy was already relaxed when he cut off his arm and asks if that's the limit. The guy explains that his words hurt Faye and that everything happened because he didn't grasp the blade with enough determination. Faye reports that even now, in this trap, the guy is still smart. He says all he wants is to have a great fight to the death. Faye says to give free rein to your emotions, to be angry and to think only about killing the enemy, and to put all your feelings into it. He says move and cut, repeating kill, kill. The man says don't let them die, don't let them die, and the woman explains that he promised to protect and won't make the same mistake again. He says if he's destined to die, then, and starts saying the word spa. Faye says he simply entangled his opponent and won't be able to hold him for long, and also says that's not bad either. Faye then asks if everything is okay, reminding him that the other man's arms and legs are broken. The man explains that he'll definitely return the favor for the way he was treated and for. He says that this won't work and shouts the word gravity. Faye says kh. The creature makes gi sounds. The creature says it's very tired. He delivers a powerful blow to the bound creature. Then he concentrates on his next move. The creature rises into the air and he watches it. At this moment, a girl with long hair leaps forward and delivers a powerful blow to the creature, slicing its neck. The girl says she's used up all her mana and can't use magic anymore, explaining that she can't handle it on her own. Faye yells at her to stop sitting there and calls the girl a brat. He says that even if he dies here, no one will blame him, just like those who died smiling. He says that the time he spent with the teacher and the kids was important to him, and it's his fault that he couldn't save them. He explains that what happened next makes. The man says he must act and kill him. Faye says that only shame cannot be washed away. He shouts Werner, and Werner tells him his full name, he is Hans Diesberg, and strikes. Faye says he won't stop until he destroys everything. He explains that his goal is to erase everything that hinders him. He says he finally feels better. Faye says it looks like he missed the target, but it was kind of funny. A voiceover reveals that this island was the last place for powerful creatures to live. He says it's boring to just wait until the end of his life. A man lies face down on the ground, a booted foot next to him. A girl with black marks on her face looks forward. Faye says that dying at the hands of someone strong isn't so bad. He explains that there's no need to act surprised, and that the person he's talking to understands how people like them end up. He says they fought equally. He fought to the last, but the other proved stronger and won. Another character explains that this is what he desired as a warrior, an honorable death. Faye says the meaning of life isn't to waste it on someone else, to not use others to justify your life, and if you can't find meaning, keep looking. Faye explains that, yes, that's the only way to look at him. Faye says she still makes that face. The man says that Faye X. He says not to talk about what he doesn't know. He explains that he doesn't like it when people talk as if he's been through it all himself, when in fact they know nothing about him. He calls Werner and says that all the wounds immediately opened up. He explains that the main thing is to return the shadow and, in its likeness, the wounds, as the girl explains that she's almost whole and asks him not to look at her like that anymore, because there are people who care about Faye, and he needs to accept that. Faye says that for some reason he feels guilty. The girl says that of course he feels that way and asks him to accept that fact, laughing. The girl says she hasn't seen Prince Faye in a while. A man named Rawl says that part of the squad has gone off to collect rainbow flowers, which are needed for research, and that they've been gone for quite some time. The man asks to talk for a while. The girl asks what he's planning to do and asks for at least. Faye says they'll stay and wait for the others. The man explains there are other vampires on the island and asks if they've noticed. The boy explains that there's a camp of those who constantly cause them trouble on the island and that there's only one warlike one. The woman reports that they continue to kill their people. He says that means they will appear soon. He explains that his strength is running out, he has lost too much blood, and doubts they will survive this, after which the man offers Faye to take this. Faye says they decided to take a break. The girl tells him to gather as much grass as he wants, and asks if he knows what her brother would do, explaining that he would bring home those he brought to this island. He says that even if he has to abandon someone, he will do it and protect those he is obliged to protect. In the center of the page is a large. It's initially reported that it was then, having learned his days were numbered, that he began to distance himself from his family if there was a chance to save his brother. Faye says he's right and asks them to judge him as much as they want, but also understands that forcing them to fight now is definitely a bad decision. He says the most he can give is half an hour. The man asks if that's okay. He explains that his brother and the head maid will take the wounded and leave the island if they're persuaded, and that's his condition. Faye says he's the most famous trash prince and that he refuses nothing, being arrogant in everything, both in protecting and helping, both in the past and in the future. The man reveals that ultimately he's a coward who's afraid of losing his friends and that he can't abandon them no matter what. The guy says it's pointless, but it's fun to laugh and that he's going to die anyway. The man asks if that's too arrogant. The guy asks if he killed him, right? He says he won't listen to him for now, so he asks him to say it that way. The woman and he both say it's definitely true. The girl informs them that they are surrounded and need to run. Faye runs next to her, waving her weapon to fight off the attacking worm-like creatures. He says that even if they use short-range teleportation, they'll be quickly caught up with, and curses the situation. The girl says they're too far away to teleport without preparation, and the boy asks how they'll escape then. A man with a spear protects the girl from the approaching monster. Faye says Spada. Faye protects the girl from attacking creatures. Faye and the girl look towards the danger, and the guy with the bandage on his face watches closely. He says he has a message from Roll, saying that enemies are taking the ship to a designated location and they need to teleport there. The man says there are still monsters coming. The man explains that there's no time and they need to leave. At that moment, he's holding a girl who looks scared. Faye reveals that this isn't just a monster, but something more, and explains that if it isn't destroyed now, the consequences will be catastrophic. The man warns that the attack could cause a cave-in and says they need to act quickly. Faye and the man jump down to strike the creature, while he says he thought it was something that flew in, and that when you come back like that, it's unexpected, to say the least. He says, ouch, and tries to get up, and then exclaims, see. He and the others fall down, he says that. Faye reports that he thought that if he teleported so far away, his pursuers wouldn't be able to catch up. The man addresses the immortal and says that the guy who appeared nearby wasn't on the boat. The girl wonders if this guy could be the one. He says they will definitely meet again. The man with long hair laughs and says, ha! The girl in the white jacket asks, what? He says the same thing in surprise, and then his gaze focuses and he says, B. The man clutches a knife in his hand. Faye tells the princess that she must be quiet. Faye shouts at the princess. The hooded guy yells that he knew it and tries to hit Faye with a stick, but he tells him to wait. The hooded guy reveals the name Trash Prince of Iceberg with surprise. The girl explains that she's fine and that he's not their enemy. Faye says he understands the feeling. The man explains what it was. The man addresses the girl, saying, hey. The girl asks if they saw the person who did it. He explains that it was only a moment. He had excellent vision and hearing, and the whole world was a living hell, asking if the girl really wants to hear that. The girl replies, no. He says that she shouldn't use this ability too often, because Faye reports that they managed to collect the rainbow flowers. The girl calls out to Rowley, asking where the flowers they collected are, and says she was holding the last one in her hands. Rowley explains that the flower is here and they haven't lost it, and says everything is fine. The girl says that now it will be. The guy says it's okay if a girl can't smile, and advises her to value her emotions and heart. The girl looks at him in surprise and touches her hair. A boy and a girl turn to Faye, informing him that it looks like he's managed to escape. Faye looks ahead. He says he is a prince. He reports that he was indeed able to protect them. He says, ha. A week has passed. Linzel reports that the bait has been eaten again. Faye says that fishing in such a place is normal, and Linzel explains that today is a holiday in honor of his birthday after the transfer. The boy tells the man that the theme of the day is the hero of Disturg, and if they were present at the celebration at the castle, they would be the center of attention. The man replies that it was him again. The man asks who caused this. The boy says he's very sorry and that he didn't mean for it to happen. He explains that he didn't. They reportedly returned to Sardinia safely, though no one thought they would return alive. The man recounts how they tried their best to find out the outcome of the expedition to Devil's Island, and that there was a long debate. Furthermore, Linzel's soldiers spread the news and told everyone about it. Faye says she sees nothing but a ton of problems, citing the example of the courtyard when she came to pick up the ship. The woman says the payment is good, so it's just one loan, adding that she says so. Faye demands he give her back and a quiet life. The man explains that if Faye has so many problems, the girl explains that Princess Linshen needs a special, honest man who can see her and understand her situation. For this, one must be quite insightful. He says that he understands this perfectly well and is suitable for the princess. Fei says it's impossible for him and that he's no less of a problem than Princess Lin Sheng. He explains that the idea of someone being with him is unimaginable, so he refused. Fei then suggests that the man might be right. The man explains that it's not something he's capable of doing. The girl announces that she forbade anyone from going outside without permission and shouts, "Your Highness." The man says that, as far as he understands, the processing of the rainbow flower is already finished, and the slacker will get what he deserves. He warns that he'll be right down and asks them not to try to escape. Fei says it's a fishing rod and calls the person she's talking to, "Your Highness." Fei says she'll pull it out faster. The woman asks what's wrong, and three maids report that a strange bouquet has appeared among the flowers used to decorate the dining room, but the head maid isn't there yet. The woman explains that it seems His Highness is the one who regularly replenishes the supplies and offers to take the bouquet to his room. The woman confirms and says. Three girls discuss the first time they've heard Feo's flowers dry and notice he spends a lot of time in the garden. A girl with a bouquet of flowers walks down the hallway, humming. She enters the room and places the bouquet next to the bed. The woman says he interacts with others more and more each day, but ultimately, she's the one who cares for him. She carefully holds a bunch of amaryllis. The woman explains that they're probably all laughing too, and he hasn't changed at all. The woman says that finally. Tiara says that she is Tiara. The woman says she's not the same now and hopes her interlocutor survived until the very end. The man explains that no one blamed the interlocutor, they were all to blame, and the interlocutor made them blame themselves. The girl and Fei say they can't jump too far without preparation and ask if they can jump to where their brother and the others are. Fei says that if they use a short jump, they'll catch up right away. Fei thanks them. He says that a ship is waiting at the agreed-upon location and they need to sail away on it. The man says that they are left alone behind the others. The man grabs the girl. He is surprised. The man says that they have bought themselves some time and suggests they leave. Fei defends herself from the monster's attacks, which suddenly approach and strike. Fei then plummets downwards along with two other characters. He says he thought how suddenly he ran away and came back. That was also unexpected. Then he screams, the man and the girl fall. The man talks about the sea, and he says, "Hey you," and uh-oh. Fei says that since they fled here, no one will catch up with them. Fei asks Roel who that is, since he wasn't on the ship with them. Roel explains that he's a man. The girl says that maybe. He says that they will definitely meet again. Then he says with surprise what it is. The girl and the man say ah and ah. He makes an ah sound and opens his eyes wide. The man clutches the hilt of his sword. The girl, her mouth closed and tears in her eyes, tries to choke on her saliva. Fei reports that the lady has lost consciousness. He yells for the man to come here. The man asks him to wait, explaining that he's fine and not an enemy. He's surprised and calls the man the trash prince from Duisburg. The man holds a sword and says he's the one she told you about. Fei says it's a feeling. Fei explains that this is what it is. Fei says hey and touches the other guy's forehead, who replies I. The girl asks if he's met people who have become like this, and explains that one of them could see and hear clearly and everything on Earth was hell for him. He says he can hear and warns her to use less force, otherwise she could destroy her personality. The girl says she's holding back, and he calls her. Fei reports that they managed to collect the rainbow flowers. The girl says she was holding the last flower in her hands and asks about the flower she was carrying. Fei explains that everything is fine, none of them are missing. The girl says how wonderful it will be when her brother gets the flower and asks him to have some fun with his life. He explains that your feelings are important too and should be valued. The girl says that if you can smile like that, then everything is fine. The girl is surprised and asks questions. Fei and the girl turn to His Highness, informing him that they were able to safely sail away on the ship. Fei looks forward. He says that's how he was able to protect them, and the man shouts, "Prince He." The man runs to Fei, who is lying on the ground. Fei says that, firstly, if the hero of Duisburg, who everyone is talking about, had come to the festival, he would have drawn all the attention to himself. The man asks why this happened, and asks for forgiveness for this. Fei explains that it's because things have gone too far in the kingdom of Satans. They reportedly made it home safely through the kingdom of Satans, but the kingdom didn't expect them to return alive. A quarrel ensued as they were pressed for various answers about how the battle on Devil's Island ended, and a soldier from Linzel. The girl explains that Her Majesty is deprived of and has no need for an innocent man or someone who cannot be seen. She needs someone who truly understands her situation and will care for her. Fei informs him that he is the only ideal candidate for this position. He explains that in the future there can be no one by his side, he can't imagine it, and therefore refused. The man says that it is impossible for anyone to be by his side and that he is no less difficult than His Highness Lietian. The man asks if he could at least take care of this, since it won't be possible. The girl tells Faye that she asked him not to go outside alone and demands that they resume their walks next month. The man asks if Faye has finished processing the rainbow flowers. Faye explains that they are leaving now and asks him to try not to move. He says, the fishing rod, Your Highness." He says he's pulling and orders to quickly take it and reel it in. Three maids are discussing a strange bouquet among the flowers decorating the dining room and the absence of their supervisor. One explains that it appears to be a regular delivery from His Majesty Faye. Another asks if the bouquet will then be taken to His Majesty's room. The maid with glasses reports that a girl says the flowers are for His Majesty, another girl says that's strange, and a third explains that there are many things growing in the garden. The girl walks in with a bouquet of flowers and a watering can humming. The girl closes the door and places the bouquet in the room. Faye says it's the same every month, and in the end, he's the one doing the courting. He explains that the radiant Lycoris is refined but dangerous. Faye reports that they still laugh and haven't grown at all. The woman says that I'm at the end. The woman and the girls smile, holding flowers. The woman says this condition isn't typical for her, and she's the only one left alive. Faye explains that it affected everyone, so he didn't blame anyone, but that's probably why he started blaming himself. The woman explains that their first meeting in a small town was colored red, just like this flower. The next scene describes how, one day, a destroyed black sun towered over the sky and a rain of flames fell upon the earth. Those who tried to escape were destroyed by those responsible. This was a common occurrence in that world. It happened everywhere. The only thing that was different about that time was Faye says the word "oh" and says that he happened to be nearby. A woman and a girl report that there's a survivor here. He's breathing heavily and holding his head tightly in his hands. The man stares ahead with an intense gaze. The moment he falls to the ground among the rubble is shown at the top right. A little boy who was holding the burnt body blamed them for everything that had happened and attacked them. A boy with disheveled hair reports that the teacher stopped him instantly and asks if he was right in the face. The man explains that it was nothing more than a normal situation in that world, and the only thing that was different was this little girl. The man says he'll keep an eye on him. From right to right, top left, a man with dreadlocks, a woman, and a girl with pigtails look at a boy with swirls of eyes who is being held by his hair. The man announces that this is the newest addition to their family. Below, a girl in a maid costume explains that many things have happened since then. The girl jokes that he's 10 years younger than her, and he's also a prince, 24 years old. She says that's not something she wants to appreciate. The girl explains that this time she's sure he wants to experience more, to make lots of memories and laugh a lot. Faye says he needs to tidy himself up now and asks if there was a bow on the bouquet. The girl explains that he always gave the flowers unwrapped and warns that if he's treated carelessly, he'll have to throw the bouquet away. Faye warns that something strange is happening in the Empire, and the woman says it wasn't her imagination. The soldiers are indeed in a hurry, and the atmosphere in the castle is tense. The man asks what's going on, and the woman tells Latifah to go to His Highness Shutin's room. The man exclaims. Latifah orders her to tell His Highness not to. Faye announces that it's finally over. He apologizes and explains that it took a long time. Faye explains that he must have someone who values it enough for those in need of the cure. The man asks about the cooperation agreement with Zir and explains what needed to be created for. He reports that he's having bad luck today. The man asks if he caught anything. The girl bursts into the room and announces that their Highnesses Glaria and he must return to Deesburg immediately. The man and he ask the girl if she's fairy. The boy asks Lasenia if she's saying this. Lasenia explains that even if he's forgotten his past and lives as Faye Hans Deesburg, they won't tell him a word and that he is who he is no matter what. Faye remains silent. The clock shows midnight and continues to tick. He says it's still midnight. Faye reports that things have gotten worse since he returned from Linsdale, but he can't remember his face. Faye asks if he was called. The woman tells him that a lot of time has passed and asks how he's feeling. He explains that they've been through a lot for the medicine and he's fine except for his legs. He'll be completely healthy in another month or two and there shouldn't be any side effects from the medicine. The woman asks if this is her youngest room. The girl asks if Faye can lend her a sword. Faye asks to just give it to him. The girl hesitates. The man explains that Faye left his sick brother alone and is becoming lazy day by day. The man calls Faye disobedient and swings his sword. Faye shouts at the younger brother. The woman says he's up there, and the guy asks where he is. He screams, jumping down. The man, surprised, asks what's going on. He yells for Shutin and asks what that was. The man says that, as expected of the rumored hero, he's proud to be his brother. Second Prince Shutin Hans Deesburg says he never visited him, so he came to see him himself, and that he only ever worries about Glaria. First Princess Nadia Hans Diesberg says his brother and sister are quite lonely and suggests not speaking for her. The woman tells Faye to hurry up and change his clothes, as they're late for the appointed time, and the boy replies, "What time exactly?" The man invites Faye to go to lunch with them, asking if he's free. The girl warns that martial law has escalated, and even the maids. Faye explains that, for example, it's okay to ask his younger brother something. Faye abruptly declares she'll go, despite the girl's objections, who says she'll go with him. The man asks where he's going, and Faye says she'd rather help Gloria's brother with his business. He says, "Lottie," and he shouts, "Lottie." The girl with the braid explains what happened to her. Faye asks how the decor is and reports that the restaurant has a magnificent view. He explains that each area is separated by a protective magical device and has the same level of security as the castle reception area, so one can enjoy a feeling of openness and safety, and that this place is just for them. He tells Shuten that he brought him here because of the incident with the attack on his father and asks him to stop this farce. Faye says that even after a month, he hasn't said anything and already thought the man had lost interest. He reports that when they hurried home from Linsdale using the post horses, he no longer finds it interesting. Several men call out to their father. The father notices how quickly time has passed. He says they abandoned the wounded soldiers. The man explains that they are members of the royal family and must be extremely careful in such situations, and orders them to hurry and deliver the medicine. He explains that it turns out the wounded man is fine, no one said he was wounded, and only. Faye reports that the previous king signed a peace treaty with the empire, which remains in effect to this day, and as proof of the peace treaty, the imperial princess became her father's concubine when he was heir to the throne. The man apologizes to Shuten. The girl says she doesn't think that's true. He says that even if they are members of the Diesberg royal family, they also have the blood of the imperial royal family in them, and then explains it in other words. Faye says that Glaria is overestimating the trash prince, although frankly he really is just a trash prince. Faye explains that the trash prince has now become a hero, and the feeble second prince has miraculously recovered. Faye says that it would be strange. He explains that the country remains under control for now, but the empire will soon try to persuade the nobles to push them to the throne. He explains that, why don't he and the girl catch the attacker and fend off the empire? The guy asked why. He tells. Faye reports that her sister would be willing to assist them. Faye explains that the reason he's helping them is because he's keeping an eye on them in case they conspire with the empire or want to harm Glaria. The woman with the sword says she thinks one of them wanted to become king. Faye explains. The woman reports that even though Faye's body has recovered, his mental state remains the same. He explains that he does this because he loves his family more than anything in this world and will continue to love them until the end of his days, even if he lives today and may die tomorrow, and if the position of king prevents this. Faye says that you have to put your conscience aside no matter what happens, and that it's him. He then explains that he's a trash prince who wasn't cut out to be king and doesn't want to become one. He doesn't even want to become a hero. He says that he wants Glaria to become king-like. Shuten asks what he, von Jugeston, means by the question of whether he can kill a man. He, von Jugeston, asks not to interrupt him and explains that even if they share the same blood through their mother, who was a princess of the empire, they will not be able to curb the empire unless they do so. Faye says that if he can ease Glaria's brother's burden in this way, he'll gladly do so, and clarifies that it's not like he hasn't killed anyone yet. The girl asks him how many people he thinks he killed in Aphilis. The man asks what Faye's answer will be and is confident. The woman reports that her mother's servants, who came from the empire, always blamed Faye when Shuten was ill, saying that Faye had poisoned or cursed him and forbade her from entering the dining hall, and things did not calm down even after her father and mother intervened. The girl explains. Faye and Faye look at the broken glass. The guy reports that the glass has broken. The girl asks if it's fire. The man explains it's a spell. The man notes that there were a lot of people here and says they destroyed the magical protection with fire. The girl confirms and orders priority evacuation of the guests. The man orders Faye. The woman says, "Your Highness Nadia." Faye says it's a decline. Faye notices they've disappeared. The girl asks if that's magic too. The man explains that the spellcaster is far away now and that must be it. The man confirms. The woman says he brought her here because he knew this would happen. He explains that she said she would help them, not be bait. He reports that enemies are approaching. Faye explains that it's a barrier filled with a large amount of magical power that creates a distortion and deflects all possible influences. He says he's not finished yet. The girl says it won't protect the guests, but the man asks them not to worry. He reports that children with this kind of illness usually die before the age of 7, no matter how much magical power they release. Despite the illness, he was born and managed to live for 16 years, with his magical power vessel expanding significantly. Now that he has recovered thanks to the rainbow flower, he tells. Faye speaks to Arcana. The girl and the boy report that all of this is blocked by a barrier and express admiration. He announces that they are still coming. He warns everyone to pay attention. Then the figures are shown starting to crumble. He notices that the fire has also gone out and asks if they have escaped. The girl is surprised and asks if they have left. He replies that they should still be nearby. Faye tells Aicshuten to remove the barrier for a second. The girl tells Ah and asks, Ah. Faye explains that this is actually the first time he's used this type of large-scale magic and admits he doesn't know how to remove the barrier. He explains that they'll have to wait until Shuten's magical power runs out, as large-scale magic shouldn't take long. He reports that he has about 90% of his magical power left and can probably maintain it for another 3 to 4 days. The man offers to use his. The hooded man explains that in this situation, it's impossible to kill their targets, as the barrier is quite problematic, and above all, the hero won't let them kill them. He says they can simply use the power bestowed by the great sage and laughs, wondering what a recovering man and a rookie hero can do. The man explains that if they had killed Princess Nadia and the elf there, Prince Shuten and Prince Fei would have been suspected of their murder, and they could have recruited the princes to their side while simultaneously eliminating their targets. The man then states that this was a rare opportunity and should be taken more seriously. The man says that he has become so impatient and stupid, he was only planning to watch them, but now it has turned into a big commotion and they will look for him. Faye says okay, then explains that it was hard for him to get into this country and he doesn't think he can maintain this identity for long. He says they've made dinner and asks if everything's okay. The man asks why they came home so late. The man yells that that's not what he asked and accuses them of being attacked in a wealthy neighborhood, demanding to know why Faye and. The woman explains that she wasn't spoiling Faye, but simply wants to protect him and the world. Faye says she can't do that and says she doesn't want Anna to die if she dies because of someone like him. Anna confirms that everyone always says that, and Faye starts to talk. But then, the girl says there's no such thing as someone like you. The man remains silent. The woman says she'll be sad too if they break up and asks if Faye knows about it, to which he agrees. Faye explains that he's been dreaming about Anna now, and last time it was about Lysenia, whom he hadn't seen in his dreams for a long time. Faye explains that this is because he says that since he's awake, he'll go get some fresh air. Then he says that he needs to warn them not to enter his room. Faye informs them that they are both now forbidden to go outside and asks why he is being punished. He hopes his brother won't change his mind. Faye notices that the light is still on in Glaria's brother's room and says so to herself. Faye makes a sound of doubt. The girl stands with her back to him. He explains that when Sensei saved him, he couldn't swing a sword, and her skills really helped him. He explains that she cared for him even when he didn't get along with others and was a kind person. However, he explains that one day she suddenly committed suicide. Faye says she'll kill anyone who gets in their way. The girl announces her return. Faye apologizes and explains that there would have been a big fuss if someone else had seen him. He asks them to be kind enough to take security with them, or at least leave a letter if they leave, and he asks if the girl always starts work this early and explains that once you get used to it, it's not so hard since, after all, older people tend to wake up early. The girl asks if they found anything on their walk today, to which he replies, no. Faye reports that many new staff have arrived, so she and the knights are using the large cafeteria, but they still use it to prepare food for themselves or when they need something urgently. The girl explains that it's a staff cafeteria. The man says he didn't know such buildings existed on the castle grounds. The man thanks him for waiting. He says it's delicious and makes a noise of pleasure. The girl asks if he'll eat, to which he replies, a little later. The guy says this portion isn't for just one person. He made it bigger in case they want more, like a growing body. The girl suggests they just join in, explaining that there's no point in eating alone and that it's not very comfortable being watched. The woman apologizes and says that since. The girl reports that the doors are locked and orders Faye not to move. Faye looks at the door with a wary expression. The girl says it's the same as yesterday. He looks forward. The man with the sword walks forward. The man sits down. He and the girl stand in the room. Faye asks what this all means. The man names Shuten, who is sitting in a wheelchair, and a girl named Glaria, saying that this time they won't allow Glaria to interfere. The guy reports that the attackers were targeting the king and could not have committed such a reckless act without precise information. Their actions were not based on rumors, but were built on data transmitted by their spy. He explains that they have long suspected of imperial spies in Dietz. The boy explains that the soldiers who served either Aphilis or Lincel knew about the rainbow flower, but only those who went with them to Devil's Island. He explains that they would have been dead if Faye hadn't been there. The man says he doesn't think so. He says that the one who saw his power up close in Aphilis, who knew about the legend of the rainbow flower, who knew about his conversations with the merchant who helped him, and knew about his intention to visit Devil's Island. The man says that there is only one person who comes to mind. The man says that, of course, they will be rewarded and can ask for anything, be it money, land, or women. Faye explains that he won't change sides so easily. The man laughs and says that this is the best move he could come up with. The man explains that the Empire has no plans to conquer this country. He says that he doesn't really hate his interlocutor, and the man laughs and says, "Ha!" Faye and the man engage in combat, their swords clashing violently. The man attempts a strike, but Faye parries it and strikes back. The man reports that it was unexpected. The man reveals that he has installed bombs in some of his magic formulas that will explode immediately upon contact with anything. He calls them shadow swords. Noticing that the color has changed, he yells, "Bomb," when the explosion occurs. Faye asks if he's prepared. The man explains that Faye is a master swordsman and has abilities far beyond those of a 14-year-old and that he couldn't have defeated him without special training. The man explains that there's only one way for him to win overwhelming numbers, Faye says. The girl suggests doing this. He curses and lunges forward with his sword, saying it's crap, and orders her to cover her ears. The girl covers her ears, and he shields her with his body. A woman reports that mountains of corpses are falling. The woman warns Faye that he is in danger. Faye and the woman move quickly toward the man. A guy with a sword strikes a man, who tries to parry but is wounded in the shoulder. A girl watches with a surprised expression on her face. The man with a gun shoots the guy with the sword. Then the guy with the sword and the man with the gun collide in midair, causing a collision. Faye explains that she lived in a sanctuary called the Sacred Mountain and could use the spirit arts, lived for hundreds of years, and was worshipped in a large country of mixed races. She was a descendant of the priestess of the Sacred Mountain. The man explains that even now, when that country and the Sacred Mountain, the man explains that even if the priestess has no intention of gathering heroes to Dyesburg, the Empire still considers her a threat, so they sent a spy to monitor her. He reveals that the reason for the attack on the king was not simply the priestess's origins. The man explains that if the priestess, Faye says, "Don't you dare underestimate the Dyesburg royal family." He screams about shadow swords, then there's an explosion. The man grabs something with his hand. The man and the girl fly into the air together, and flashes and explosions are visible below. The man tells Faye he'll let him go now, and orders him to go down first. Faye agrees. The man rushes forward, and the girl with the sword also moves forward rapidly. The man parries the girl's attack, after which the girl falls to the ground, and the man continues to hold the sword. The guy asks if he missed and tells her she didn't fall. He explains it's a tying technique of his. The guy then attacks sharply but gets hit in the chest. The girl tells him to run. Faye yells "Zangeki," attacking his opponent. The man is struck in the chest and begins to bleed. He breathes heavily and clutches at the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. The man leans heavily on the stone, making wheezing sounds. His gaze becomes intense. He says one fatal blow. He explains that if you decide to swing your sword, kill your enemy, whoever they are, and even if it is him, kill them responsibly. Faye says it sounds like this man is dangerous and laughs. Faye says he's sure this man lived in a hellish place where enemies were everywhere. The man with the knife lunges forward. Faye explains that these are shadow swords. The man says, "Ah," as he falls to the ground with a wound in his side. He raises his sword above his head and delivers a powerful blow, causing a large explosion and a blast of earth. The man is breathing heavily and saying, "Ha-ah, ha-ah, ha-ah." Faye stands in front of the man and says, "Ha-ah." The man falls to the floor, and Faye points her sword at him, from which numerous blades fly out. He explains that all powerful people and heroes are either crazy killers or manipulated into doing someone else's bidding because they are hostages. He explains that each of them has bloodshot eyes. Many of them, like him, rely on smoking and drugs, however. Faye says hesitation will lead to death. Faye says she knows. The man explains that it's easy to read Faye. Faye asks if the man can kill him responsibly. The man says that being a bystander is also bad. He explains that no matter how cautious a person is with others, once they become close, he will accept them and care for them. The woman says that Your Highness is too naive and kind. Faye tells him to stop humiliating himself and explains that those around him will be saddened if he continues to do so. The man suddenly strikes. Faye reacts with fear, and the girl yells at Faye to step back. He informs him that he now belongs to someone else. The man explains that he doesn't know if this is the right answer, but he won't forgive them if they die a stupid death. The man addresses Faye, calling him Your Highness. Faye says that if they can't stop this, everyone will die. The man says they need to evacuate immediately. The woman explains that they can't just leave the building. Faye says he'll try to stop the destruction. The woman orders everyone to stay put and not panic. The man warns that. He says, "Your Highness." He reports the sound of dripping liquid. The man says that if Faye is trash, then his vassal is an idiot, and calls them trash and an idiot, then suggests that they could be good companions. Faye replies that no way, he needs his vassal to be smart. The man explains that Faye was trying to protect. The man laughs. The man says that the other person is so stern, Your Highness. The woman says that Faye is truly an idiot and begins her sentence by addressing him. A man, a girl, and a boy enter the room. In the north of Diasburg, on the border with the Kingdom of Regalia, a man reports that another man has come again, and this is quite unexpected for him. Then he says to Zerum. Faye reports that it's Aphilis's carriage, and asks if they use airships to get to Diasburg. He adds that it seems carriages often enter Diasburg. The girl explains that even after the war, they'll likely be busy, and they have a reason to use such a carriage. He reports that there are many people in the castle who don't trust him, and therefore he must be the one to kill the traitor. He explains that, as expected of an imperial soldier, he left no evidence. He says they cannot act without evidence to support these actions. A guy asks about fishing line. A man tells a guy something. Faye says her name. A girl sits by the window. He reports that he clenched his teeth. The woman says it's rare to see Faye like this, as he's known as the Sleeping Prince. Faye explains that he just happened to wake up at that time. The woman says Faye wouldn't wake up even if she stuck her finger up his nose. Faye jokes that she always sleeps until noon. He reports that a letter arrived this morning from Mephia Zwei Aphilis, who is such a diligent person that she sends letters every week. The girl explains that he asked her to keep him updated on the situation in Epirus and asks if he plans to read it later. Faye reveals that not only the head maid, Her Highness Galeria, but he himself also regrets certain things. He explains that even when he wants to live his life with as few regrets as possible, he will ultimately worry about what he should have done and should have done, the girl tells. The woman says that if he had the chance to go back in time, he would. The man asks if he could go back in time, would he? Faye says she wants to go back. The man asks if Faye wants to go back to the past. Faye replies that he probably can't anymore. The man says that it's clear. He says he doesn't want to go back to the past simply because it's sad and painful. The woman explains that if he can't turn a blind eye to it, then nothing good will happen to him if he does. She explains that his desire to protect someone is something he was entrusted with and a way of life. Faye says to stand even when you're hurting, to fight, to live, and to keep moving forward. Faye tells you, Your Highness. Latifah asks what's wrong and notices that Faye has suddenly gone silent. Faye explains that he zoned out a bit. Latifah asks why he zoned out when. The girl tells Faye to stand and addresses him as Your Highness. He runs. The woman exhales and says she forgot to give him it. The man says, ouch. Faye asks why the girl is in his room and where his sister is, and says that Glaria took her away, saying the situation is getting tense. The girl clarifies that the situation is tense. Faye explains that, firstly, there's no proof the Empire did it, and secondly, they have an urgent visit. He tells her that the route she took to enter the country is also a bit odd, and asks her not to tell him about it. He then asks if something happened in Aphilis. The girl explains that it's just a report on the progress of Aphilis's restoration and that the princess of the kingdom of Aphilis. Faye says he'll have to go to her, and the others should look for Feely in the meantime. He orders her to tell her father and brother that he'll deal with her and not let them near the guest room. The man calls out to Faye. Faye muses that if she wants an answer, she should have said so in writing. He reports that there is no answer, then knocks on the door and explains that she must have someone to open the door. After that, the door opens and he says that the person he is talking to is finally here. The girl says that they haven't seen each other for a long time, addressing her dear prince. Faye says they met in Aphilis and asks who she is, then says she's done with her nonsense. The girl explains she's Mephia Zwei Aphilis. She explains that she doesn't call her dear prince, doesn't wear the kingdom's emblem, and doesn't laugh like that. He says he thought he killed his interlocutor, and the other explains that it means he's still alive. He then strikes with his sword, and the fight begins. The woman says it's a game of mirages, the hero Idis Farazard. The woman says that faith is a terrible thing, and the man explains that she tricked him into believing she was dead through an illusion. The man explains that he had considered this outcome and double-checked everything, which is why he ordered Dietsburg soldiers to examine his body instead of entrusting it to the Affili warriors. The woman says she's not interested in becoming a mistress or anything like that. The girl asks what she should do with it. The man says he's asking to meet via note and asks if she knows what time it is. At this point, the man reports that he is under close surveillance, but the girl was able to evade surveillance and come to him unnoticed, though he doubts she is a simple maid. The man explains that the trust the girl has in Prince Fei is different from the trust a servant has in his master, and that this is normal. A woman throws away a cigarette butt, and a man asks for a medicine made in the Empire when things are over, explaining that it can make a person stronger. The woman says she thinks someone of her caliber would do the same, calling it an abomination. The man explains that, besides, the girl explains that if she gave it to him, he would develop everything on his own, and besides, it could be used as evidence, and after all, the country is in dire straits. She says she'll decide after checking what's inside. Then the girl notices something and asks where it came from. Faye informs them that the patterns created by these pills will become a dark sun and kill many people. He explains that they must not allow these pills to exist. Faye sharply asks why the other character has this thing and where they got it, demanding an answer. In the upper right corner, a man with a sword and a girl in a dress are sitting on the ground, the man holding the girl by the shoulder. In the lower right corner, a man in a dress is sitting, covering his mouth with his hand. In the upper left corner, a girl with long hair is striking the man with her hand. He shouts at the girl, demanding an answer, and the guy reports that something came loose. He says, "Ah," and points to the pain. The woman says that this isn't who they were looking for, and that he shouldn't have been here. The man with long hair explains that they can't let him leave. Faye screams. The man with long hair attacks the monster. The girl with long hair opens the box. He tells them to kill them and orders them to use shadow swords. He reports that these bastards rushed to protect him. He screams, "Bastard." Faye tells him not to get in his way, and the man calls him a prince. Then a monster with horns and glowing eyes is shown, after which Faye looks on in horror. In the next shot, the monster wraps its tentacles around its victims. The woman says, "Well, that's it for starters." A minute later, one of the monsters suddenly attacks Faye, who's lying on the floor. The woman screams in horror that the guy is already dead and asks what the monster is doing, then says it's a mistake. Faye says his blood is boiling. He feels the same as before, when memories and emotions he suppressed come to the surface. The man orders them to be killed. The monster receives a powerful blow, causing its body to shatter. The man with the sword quickly retreats, and he delivers a powerful blow that tears apart the ground around him. The horned monster looks at them in surprise. Faye announces the name of the shadow sword technique, then strikes the enemy, after which she laughs. He explains that just a few of these inferior creatures could destroy an entire country, that heroes would have a hard time defeating even one of them, and yet he dispatched them so easily. The girl screams that he's a bastard and orders him to finally die. The man explains that if he deprives the girl of her hearing and sight, Faye says things might have been different if they were in a wide field like they were then, but in this small room, even without his hearing or sight, he can tell where the girl's shadow is moving. Then Faye wants to ask her something before he cuts off her head for the last time. He says that these are pills and asks where the girl got them from. The woman says it's too bad for Faye and everyone he loves. Aphelis, whom he saved, Linsdell with one hero, and his beloved Dietzberg will be destroyed. The man says there will be corpses everywhere. They will be consumed by flames and monsters, and even if Faye, the woman says she'll laugh at Faye from the depths of hell. He laughs. He explains he's changed his mind and will find out about the pills himself, while simultaneously punching the woman in the face. Faye says, "Die." The man yells, "Stop, Faye." Faye and the girl jump. The man swings his sword. The man says, "Gravity." He and the girl attack the woman simultaneously, breaking the ice around her. The man and the girl shout, calling for Shooten to act. The man throws a scroll. The woman casts an arcana spell. The man and the girl defend themselves together from the attack. Faye says there's no doubt about it and says he was the one who attacked his father. The man examines Shuten's barrier. The girl shouts to her sister, asking how she is. Faye abandons her sister, shouting, "Wah, ah." He says he'll never give something up and encourages the other to go and try to destroy it if he wants. The girl calls him stupid and suggests he just kill her if he wants. He warns Shuten to take it slow, and Shuten asks Faye to calm down too. The woman tells Faye that at least he understands what he's about to do. Faye says that's enough. Faye explains that he's currently in the hero's illusion. The man yells at the woman not to touch Faye. The woman tries to touch Faye, and Faye dodges. He says, watching what's happening. He stands with his hand outstretched, from which petals fly out, and watches them as they fall. Faye reports that he has come to his senses. The girl says he stopped at the very last moment, but she can't believe he cut off her hair with a swing of his sword, and as the first princess of Dietzberg, she doesn't accept his argument. Faye explains that if they continue to allow the Empire to take the initiative, he says he's making her wait for the truth if she says this to buy time to escape, and when she escapes, she'll come again to kill them. The man explains that the inferior will continue to kill indiscriminately until they themselves die. They will no longer turn into. Faye says that the people she's talking to have their own beliefs they need to defend, and that they shouldn't be forced to share their stories. Faye then explains that he too has beliefs he will defend and doesn't want to have any more regrets. In the next scene, Faye explains that, therefore, the woman says she'll do whatever she deems necessary. He says it passed through his barrier. The man shouts at them not to dare, calling it a Gias scroll. Faye says that if he's not killed, he'll be able to find a job, and then he'll prefer that to death. The woman says that's settled then. Faye asks for her hand and then says, okay. He says that at least there used to be Uzbek, but now there's nothing at all. The man says the oath of Gias. The woman says that only Sensei and the others are his only family, and Faye asks what she is talking about. The woman says they're already dead and there's no one left. He says he promised to kill all the inferior and asks if he's forgotten. The woman explains that they need to kill them until there's not a single one left. Faye strikes with her sword, sending a man flying. The man reports that someone is breaking a window. The girl says that Faye wasn't asleep, and Faye yells back, asking what she was thinking while swinging the sword, and reminds her that it's her sister's magical sword, which activates under influence. He says that something needs to be done about Faye because he's worried about him, and the girl says that she needs to talk about what to do with Glaria. Then the girl asks where everyone is, and he points this out. The woman announces that they've left, and the man is surprised and asks why. The woman explains that they're obviously planning a private meal between the siblings, noting that they get along so well. The man thanks them for waiting and introduces their signature dish, pasta soup. The man waxes. The older man says the restaurant is a bit cramped, but quite pleasant, and the girl says her grandfather used to love going there. The boy says he's surprised his sister knows about such a restaurant. The woman explains that they're very grateful to her grandfather, and Mrs. Faye still comes here from time to time. He says there was no reason for distancing himself from his sister. The girl asks if there was any reason for it. He says that if the girl is going to dodge things like that, he won't tell her the information he received from Edith. The girl says okay and says she'll tell him. The man calls Shuten. Faye says someone simply gave her the pills, and she knows little about it. The man explains that the one who created them was a great sage of the empire. Faye asks, great sage? The man explains that it's a mysterious, high-ranking official of the empire who always wears a black mantle. He says it's easy to see that he's kind and naive, and that he's afraid of losing the people around him. It's his subconscious fear and his true nature. He then explains that whether he's a trash prince or a hero, if he continues to act the way he does now, he'll be the only one who will regret it. Faye asks if he'll still be himself, even after moving to another place and changing his name. The woman replies that, of course, he will. Faye explains that even if he moves to another place and changes his name, he'll still be himself and will cherish both his families. The woman explains that if they end up at war, the girl says he'll be fine without her. He turns to the guy, who replies, ah. The woman says she's also sorry. She hit Faye and thanks him for saving her. Faye thanks the woman and calls her by name. In the distance, the woman adds something else. He informs Glary and Shuten that they should also say the same thing when they get home. He explains that he has done almost nothing this time. The man says, let's eat. The girl explains that no matter how hard you try to push them away, it's not easy, and the further away from. The girl asks if anyone said anything. The man explains he's going to eat before everything gets cold. Faye says there's pasta in the soup and asks whether to use a spoon or a fork. The man reassures Faye and says both are fine. The man tastes the food. The boy tells her that the other one is too kind to live in this world. The girl explains that before he becomes as broken as she is, he must go crazy. The girl says the boy is part of her precious family. A man holds another man's hand. The man explains his promise. The man is kneeling near burnt bushes. The man looks at the other man's hand. Faye says he went to bed right after he got home yesterday. He says this will have to wait a little while and asks for forgiveness. Then he says that for now he wants to cherish his current family. He explains that he knows he won't break his promise and will kill all the inferior people and those who create them. The girl says, good morning, Your Highness. The man informs her that His Majesty is going to scold Faye and the others for leaving without permission yesterday, and that he ordered him to bring Faye to him, even if it means dragging him while he's asleep. The girl explains that Faye rarely. He says that this flower is special, even though Latifa took care of it for him, and asks what happened to it. The girl explains that she has never seen this flower anywhere except in his room, and asks what its name is. He reports that the flower has many names, such as spiderwort. The girl says that Shizuki and Tiara will eventually have to deal with the inferior ones, and calls the man a truly bad person for blaming everything on those two. The man explains that Shizuki still can't control all of her power and believes it will be difficult for him to kill that one. Faye announces a summit, explains to inform the leaders of each country on behalf of the Kingdom of Dietzberg. He says that even if he said so, the man says, Florist Varric informs that the last council of the Federation leaders was held before the birth of the Highness to prevent the Empire from becoming the strongest, and that all the leaders of the Federation will meet together from time to time to discuss the situation in the world, and also explains that this matter is of national importance, since the meeting is held in the kingdom. The florist suggests it might be a good idea to buy some flowers to decorate the conference room, and says, "You're welcome." The woman explains that she used to run a business in the land of animals and has flowers familiar to people of different races. She names the land of animals. The man asks if he can come. The girl says that her old acquisition is there. Faye explains that it's an old acquisition and tells him that the ruler of the sacred mountain, a spiritualist, has a Gios scroll. He says that he just realized that there are still many things he doesn't know. Faye asks if there are. He says he really wants to know why the girl sometimes speaks with nostalgia, like how she was ridiculed for trying to use a sword, even though no one ever taught her how to use one. The girl explains that one day she wants to die smiling and asks why. Faye says it concerns both of them. She says she doesn't want to force them to tell her and cause them pain from the memories, so she's decided to wait until they're willing to tell her. He says he's short on time, so he suggests they hurry up and get a bite to eat. The girl asks what restaurant he'd like to go to. He's surprised they brought someone here and says he already told her she came to pick him up. He explains that if that were the case, they could have told her to wait. Faye says that if he wants to tell this to anyone, the girl is the only one who comes to mind. He explains that she would never agree to it if he told her about his life in that world and that his name was Shizuki, but he has a faint hope that if it is her. A guy apologizes for being late and sneezes. The girl reacts and he says, "Geh." Several people notice what's happening. A woman with glasses talks about a wealthy merchant, Dvorg Zarek. The woman says she hasn't seen Prince Faye in a while and thought about asking for a favor, explaining that she was just about to ask him to set up a meeting. The girl asks what the favor is. Faye explains that it was payment for him lending her the ship he was using. He tells him to never tell anyone about the Gios scroll, as many people want it and are willing to do anything to get it. The man says he wants him to investigate something and asks if he has already done so. The woman explains that there is a connection between Dietzberg and the Empire. Faye reports rumors of Imperial soldiers entering and leaving the area, and that the excavations have made significant progress. She explains that she wants them to be prevented from taking any data and to steal it if possible. Faye explains about the ancient ruins they're targeting. He reports that this is a record of a certain swordsman who fought against a disaster during the Age of Chaos thousands of years ago. Faye says this may seem unbelievable and that a new generation will grow up in this damned world. He explains that even if they end this rotten world, the next generation would likely ridicule it as a fictional story, and one day the same thing will happen again. The boy says that even though they've sacrificed so much to achieve this, the very thought of it is unbearable. The man explains that he will leave behind proof of their existence and wonders why. The background depicts several people standing in a cave. Below, there's intense movement. The girl speaks to Faye, calling him by name. The man cries. He announces that they're almost there, and the girl says she'll go get ready. He and the girl discuss this meeting place, and he confirms that it should be so. The man and woman apologize for the wait. The woman with the folder says she values her cooperation with Prince Faye and explains that there's someone nearby. The woman says she's here as a bodyguard to accompany them, as things have become dangerous lately, and she's been assigned as a bodyguard since being the head maid might not be enough. Faye is outraged that she, of all people, was assigned, and the woman says she'll be the one protecting them. The girl asks. He explains that the maid, well, yes, despite the fact that he said that, the woman says, "What's the matter?" The man replies that nothing. The woman says she'll wait for the report, and then turns to Faye, calling him Prince, and says that she's counting on him, addressing her as. The woman explains that she gave them a carriage and bells, and was quite generous this time. The man explains that he was the one who asked for the bells to be prepared. Faye asks why. The man explains that he heard a loud noise and asks if someone was missing. Faye says that they always disappeared. Top right, the woman explains that the town is quite large for a border town and is famous for its hot springs resort, unique baths and cuisine, and is also known for its many tourists. Top left, the woman explains that thanks to centuries of peace, the girl is happy. The guy is breathing heavily. Faye says he can't call them by their usual names in the cafeteria, so she suggests they come up with fake names. The girl explains that fake names are difficult and asks him not to come up with anything weird like Dark Soldier, as that would be. He says that he will be Shizuki and thinks that he will be able to quickly respond to this name, and also asks to call him by this name while they are here. The girl asks if she can ask him a question and wonders why Faye chose that particular name. Faye starts to think about it and says, The girl explains that she thought he'd just mess up his name because he doesn't like to bother, and suggests Fal or Fanny. He says he just feels like it, and that's all he can say. The woman explains that she thinks it is and apologizes for asking. The woman asks him not to linger too long. The man says he'll be out as soon as he's ready and suggests they go ahead and find. Faye says he still wants someone to call him by that name if he says it, but he'd look so stupid doing so. He explains that he did it the moment he remembered it and considers himself so pathetic. He says that he doesn't want to do this, and that there is no longer such a way of fighting. Faye explains that the power he had that time was different from what his sensei taught him, and it was the power that allowed him to win, left alone and without self-care. He explains that if he doesn't need the sword and Shizuka's name, he shouldn't use them. Faye says they are needed. He says that he will kill both the inferior and the Black Sun, and that there is nothing his shadow sword cannot cut. He then reveals that the man came all the way here to talk to him about this, and the girl asks if that is true. The man begins to speak, and Faye reveals that he'd given up hope that other elves might be alive, and that he believed she was half-breed. After all, entry to the sacred mountain was forbidden. The girl explains that this is why, 50 years ago, only she and her father survived. The man explains. The woman says that several survivors said they were attacked by monsters. The Beastman country sent its hero to gather information, and he discovered that the sacred mountain was most likely attacked by the same monsters, but the identities of the monsters remained unknown. He reports that there was nothing at the scene. Faye tells you that your home was destroyed by the Empire. The girl explains that she kept running and, looking back, saw what appeared before her eyes. The man explains that he uses monsters, the knowledge of which was recorded in the ruins they resurrected. The boy asks what a skiz is. The woman reports that she kept running while everything was engulfed in flames, ignoring all the screams and reaching hands, because her mother had imbued her with a water dragon and her body moved on its own. The woman says that she alone was saved because she is a priestess, and the woman announces the chapter title, Ancient Heritage. On the upper right edge is a note stating that they went to dinner, and below, a girl is sitting on the bed. On the lower right, a man asks if they finished their chores, and the girl answers affirmatively. The man announces that the girl has returned, and the maid addresses her, calling her. Faye explains that Shizuki rarely treats him to food, and even if that's true, there's a limit, and the food was delicious too. The girl asks Shizuki. Shizuki explains that for some reason, the name suits Faye. She suggests that perhaps in a past life, his name was Shizuki Dev. The woman asks if the guy is back with him, to which he explains that he thinks he's in his room and says he needs to confirm something and is going to meet him. The woman says they're staying in the same room for protection and warns them not to leave the room. Faye tells him to keep smiling. The girl explains that when he doesn't smile, he confuses her. The woman tells him to just smile without thinking about anything, like Latifa. The woman asks what they mean by that. Faye says she knows that a trash prince like him can't be treated like that. The girl thanks you for your attention and says that to think that your highness would say such a thing to her, it seems that she still has a lot to do. The guy says he thought Faye was in her room, but he's finished work and is free now, so he was thinking about taking a bath. Faye asks if he wants to go. The bathtub fills with water, the guy says it's amazing, and Faye sits silently in the water. He says that right now they feel like they're on vacation, and asks when they'll be heading to the ruins. The man says he doesn't know exactly when, but when the time comes, they'll go. He then asks if the man knows about the humanoid monster that lacks intelligence, and Faye asks how much the man knows about the disaster, and the man replies that if he doesn't know, he can't say. Faye explains that he's not that stupid. The man says he'd like to apologize in advance, and Faye clarifies, apologize. The man says that if the disaster is somehow related to the ruins, then no. He says it's disappointing. He thought he'd be asked about her, but he was nervous for nothing. He reports that she looked gloomy when they returned. He explains that he won't interfere unless she asks him to, but that's a different matter if it concerns her safety. Faye says he was about to ask which maid was the favorite, but realized it was her, and says that's exactly what he thought. Faye asks if the man rejected Princess Lishan's marriage proposal, which piqued his curiosity, and reveals that there were rumors that. He explains that in the end it was him, and asks for understanding, warning him not to be overconfident. The man says he told him to look in all directions. The guy yells, ouch. The guy tells her not to rely on her sense of smell. Faye wakes up abruptly and asks what time it is, and the girl replies that it's around 4 in the morning. Faye suggests they sleep a little longer, but the girl explains that she can't sleep for long when someone is around and says she's fine. The girl greets Faye. The guy notices the light is on and says someone's there. The girl says that if they're looking for the cafeteria owner, she went out to buy ingredients and adds that she said she'd be back soon so they can sit and wait for her. He quietly says, The girl also says, Faye tells him that the key to unlocking the mystery lies in time magic. The girl asks if he's heard of it. Faye explains that he was born and raised in his country, but has never heard of time magic. The girl says that's bad and asks if he's the type of person who doesn't need such magic. The girl explains that it's a kind of dream-like magic that can be used to control time, erase all sadness and pain, and redo everything. She adds that if it really exists, it would be wonderful, and asks if the guy thinks so. He looks at her sternly. The girl says that correcting the past would be amazing, but it's stupid, and that's precisely why it's stupid. Faye explains that if he has to stop moving forward to fulfill this, it would be desecrating the memory of the people who died trying their best. He says that you can't just do that. The girl tells him to stop pretending to be a saint. He asks if that's why she rejects the possibility of a miracle, and explains that the desire to return to the past should be just that, a desire, nothing more, and not something she should strive for. The man with long hair explains that he was taught to never stop. The girl says that the man who taught Faye this was undoubtedly cruel, and asks how he was taught. Faye replies that he doesn't understand the meaning of these words, and the girl explains that the true meaning lies behind the beautiful words, warning against hope, running away, and retreating, such is. He believes that this is his way of life, the way of life of a sensei, and his fighting style. That's everything to him. The girl asks if this is everything to him, and says he's right. Faye reports that this is where she was. The man, with one eye closed, asks who it is. Faye explains that he's a nice guy. The girl says not to worry, he's just a traveler. Elena laughs and apologizes for bothering him, explaining that she's a traveler and a fugitive, and reminds him that she hasn't introduced herself yet. The man points out that they weren't even thinking about a cover story and tells Rem to shut up. Rem assures him that everything is fine. He's trying to remember the girl's name. The guy says maybe they'll see each other again. The girl says let's chat again if we meet again, and the guy hopes they can talk longer another time. The man calls the girl Shizuki. Faye muses that this is getting more and more confusing and lists the lost forest, the recordings. He says he was just killing time. The girl explains that it's rare for someone to talk to someone they just met. He says the girl looks a bit like Latifa, but then denies it and suggests it might be because he's had a similar conversation with Lati. The girl says that all sorts of moments, absolutely everything. Then she explains that if it happened, she's sure she'd wish for it. Faye says that's why he'll choose the present. He explains that besides his height, it's not just about him, but also about the size of his penis. He explains that now he has something he didn't have before. He says that if he were the same, he would just sleep in his room without talking to anyone. He says that they have made friends in other countries. The girl says the change is one of the manifestations of her unhappiness and suggests they stop talking about it. The man asks if the girl has plans for today. Faye explains that the man said they can't enter the forest right now and calls today unsuitable. The girl says she plans to lie around. The man explains that most skills rely on blood, which constantly activates in wide areas. To maintain power, they need to place cores in the four corners. While they're destroying them, they'll be easy to approach. The man says it's time to move forward. The woman says they're heading toward the core. The woman says it's rare. She didn't expect Faye to wake up so late, and Faye says he had a strange dream and apologizes. The girl with glasses is surprised that Shizuki woke up before Faye and asks if the end of the world is near, and Faye is indignant. He notices the smell of smoke, drugs, and blood. The girl says she wants to apologize to Shizuki about Latifa's breakfast. The woman calls Shizuki by name. Faye breathes heavily, runs through the forest and stops, looking around. He reports that the power of the forest is growing stronger and that it's coming from deep within the forest. He then explains that he should have been more careful because the forest is just playing with him and laughs at what he's doing. The man explains that it doesn't mean it's the same person just because the scent is similar. Faye reports that the stone slab's outline is still clear, but it's quite old. The letters are worn away and he can barely read them. He explains that he can read part of the first sentence, which is dedicated to this forest and contains the name Grudolf. The boy asks if his name was Shizuki. The girl says she wants to put everything that happened here behind her, explaining that this is the shitty reality of this hell and the one she was born into. She says that if there ever comes an era when swordsmanship is no longer necessary, this story will be necessary, and she wants to leave it for the future. Faye struggles to break free, clinging to the stone with the knives embedded in it. He then watches in amazement as the knives begin to break and the stone becomes covered in cracks and leaves. He says there's nothing in this place except rocks and grass, and that there can't be anything important here. The man says the place looks like an abandoned lot, and he doesn't see the point in wasting time searching here. He looks ahead in surprise. Faye says he thought he'd meet Sensei and the others if he died, and that's why he thought this was another world. He explains that he couldn't find out about any of them, no matter how many times he tried to search and ask about them. Faye says he thought he was sent to another world as he reports that there was no magic there were no other races like elves and vampires, he doesn't know any of the countries he knew, no one uses blood-based techniques, he couldn't find Sensei and everyone else, but the inferior exist. He explains that these flowers exist. Faye explains that if the stone slab is indeed the one Rudolph left behind, then there could be other remains. He explains that with Rudolph's blood-based craftsmanship, it would be easy to create a piece that would last for thousands of years. Faye reports that it would likely depict a deformed figure. The guy says he found a dead city not far from here and asked Shizuki if she will go with him to explore. Faye asks what the expression on the man's right is. The man on the right says that Anna said that Rudolph always puts his needs above everything else, so you have to be careful when you do anything with him. The guy on the left calls the man on the right a bitch. The man on the left explains that if the city is dead, he says he already warned them to expect an attack from any direction. Shizuki explains that you shouldn't trust your eyes, ears, and nose, but rely on your intuition and senses, which have developed through extensive experience, and calls Faye a fool. He reports that people die when Faye says it's much better to believe in yourself than not to. Rudolph explains that he sometimes notices that Faye doesn't believe in herself at all. Faye confirms this. Rudolph explains that Faye usually lies and has a terrible temper, but basically, his words are right. Rudolph. The guy explains that the one who simply has confidence wins, and the one who says they're confident wins. The man explains that the other guy also talks about being confident in leaving something behind, and that the guy uses his bloodline technique with a sword, so he should have confidence in cutting through. The guy says that if he doesn't want to embarrass himself, he needs to get stronger. Faye explains to Shizuki that Spada can cut through anything, and until she defeats them, she needs to talk to them. Another guy says that sounds good, and a third is surprised and asks if he's serious. He says he'd like to go inside the ancient ruins in the Forest of Illusions and take a look, but without knowing what to do with the illusions of Trom, he won't be able to leave so easily. He says that as soon as he remembered, he immediately calmed down. He explains that he thinks all that remains is to wait until the woman explains what it is. Elena explains that she's not from the Empire, and even if she were, they wouldn't have been able to summon her. The man explains that her lack of manners is outrageous and demands that she leave quickly, asking why she's going there. The woman reminds him that Elena summoned them herself. Faye remarks that the royal cortege resembles knights in training and explains that she is, in fact, a member of the royal family. He, with good intentions, warns her that if she is disgusted by living a life of kneeling before the Empire, she can simply run away and return to her own country, which is, after all, the kingdom of Karsus. In the top right corner, a woman explains that in just a few years the guy has changed his ideals and asks if that's unclear. In the center right, he asks if the guy misses his older sister. In the bottom right, a man asks Ram to calm down. In the bottom left, a man tells the guy to calm down for now. The man says that Faye shouldn't go to those ruins, and says this as an archaeologist, and also explains that the Karsus tragedy will no longer be considered a natural disaster, even if he doesn't go there. Faye says that the Imperials didn't listen to them from the start and came up with a plot. He says he'll talk to Dai. The girl asks if it's Shizuki. He apologizes to Elena for interrupting the conversation. Koen Sakachio reveals that he is a hero with the mind reader skill. He explains that he can hear all kinds of sounds, including the sounds of objects, sounds of the past and future, distant voices, and the thoughts of the person he is talking to. The girl clarifies that it can be any kind of sound. The man explains that this means he possesses. Faye explains that with such abilities, it's impossible for him not to know the connection between the Empire and the aliens, especially since he's not the only one. The man explains that he calls these monsters aliens, and it turns out that he's not the only one. The man asks what aliens means. Faye says he wants to be told everything. The girl screams at him, asking how he knows about these monsters, and demands an answer. He replies that no one knew about them and no one believed them, deciding they were just fiction. Faye says they need to be killed and can't be allowed to exist because he just remembers it. The man explains it's very simple. The man says he doesn't know how he knows and laughs. The man says he'll kill them at any cost. He says it sounds like a bottomless swamp, and he listens and listens, falling deep into the darkness. The guy asks if it really is a bottomless swamp and suggests digging further and checking. If he tells everything about the aliens, he can listen as much as he wants. The girl says she might accidentally find out. The man warns Faye not to underestimate the hero's power, explaining that he's currently hostile, so he can't hear anything specific and it doesn't affect him in any way. The man asks what would happen if he used his power on Faye, provided he consents. Faye replies that. He says he's trying not to vomit from disgust. The man says he was able to protect them, urges them to protect what's dear, even at the cost of their lives, wants to leave something behind, assures them that even if he's gone, everything will be fine, warns them to expect an attack from any side, and calls for the killing. Faye says she's experiencing emptiness, kills herself with a sword, and disappears, crying. The man stabs Faye. The man breathes heavily and says that Faye... A man shouts at Faye, asking why he's alive and why he's here. The man calls Faye Hans Disberg. The girl and boy are surprised, asking if this is the Trash Prince. The woman says it can't be and asks if this is Disberg. The man asks why Faye gave the princess a fake name. Faye explains that it's not a fake name and says that Shizuki is definitely his name too. The man says he hears the sounds of two lives in him, and Faye explains that one life is the life of a third prince. He says he doesn't use two different names or two identities. The man says he's living a second life and explains that, in a word, he's been reborn. Faye mentions reincarnation, then the man explains that he doesn't quite understand how that's possible. The man says he can't explain how it works or the reason for what happened, even if they wanted to know, because he himself doesn't know. Faye says that even if the world changes and his name changes, he'll still be himself. The man asks, who? He says that then what kind of being is he in the end and what kind of madness is this? He explains that his two personalities are not separate from each other. He explains that he carries a heavy burden from a past life. Faye reports that he's been through unspeakable hell. The man screams that, despite this, he took up the sword and asks how he can continue to fight, why he's still here, demanding an answer and calling him the Emperor of Swords. Faye explains that he wanted to live without resorting to. The man on the top right says it's not about whether you can do something or not. He says he already told Cohen that it doesn't matter to him whether it's his second life or his first, and that killing all aliens is his purpose in life. Faye laughs, then says, heh. The man says that this is an unexpectedly simple answer. The man says he'll tell her about the strangers, but he'll add one more condition. He offers to go with him to the ruins, where he'll be the one to reveal the secrets of the past hidden within them. He tells her not to be afraid, that it might even be beneficial. The woman says it's been ringing annoyingly all this time, and now it's suddenly gone completely silent, adding, The girl asks if someone let it go for some reason, to which the woman replies that, no, even if Shizuki lets it go, it should keep working. The woman laughs, and the girl. Chapter 39 is called Lightning Speed, Part 1. The man announces that they are going to the Forest of Illusions. Faye announces that they are following them and asks if he minds. The man explains that he is indebted to the Carcass family, and if they die, it will be on his conscience. Faye says that they confidently insist that they will follow too. The man explains that in this forest, everywhere except that. The man explains that, having lured the magnificent material with his name, the stranger's power depends on the quality of the material, that is, the person who becomes it. He explains that they probably want to make a stranger out of Elena, and says that the other man thinks he already knows, but the man explains that she possesses the high magical power inherent in members of the ancient royal line of Karsus, and that she had to endure the death of her entire family, left alone by strangers. He explains that there is a high probability of a hero outside the forest who is setting the plan in motion, and that Rune has experienced soldiers. Faye explains that protecting them and allowing them to escape will require a power comparable to his own, and that it will be the other person's responsibility. The man explains that he doesn't intend to allow more aliens to appear. The girl asks what they've been talking about all this time. He says it's just a stone's throw away. The man next to him explains something, pointing his finger. Faye says it looks like a building he saw in the Dead City. The man reports that there are 3 guards at the entrance, and the ice grave digger and others are somewhere on the upper levels. Faye asks if they're being attacked head-on. The man explains that they don't need to go to the upper levels. The guy explains that the upper levels, visible to the naked eye, aren't the most important thing. What's important is what's deep underground. He explains that the large wall paintings were left by his friend, and he has no doubt about it, so that the story with the aliens never happens again. Faye says that it may seem like a joke, but in the world he lived in, even those who hated aliens saw them as salvation. He explains that it was a world where the dominance of the strong over the weak was considered normal. The man reports that under the pretext of stupid ideas and ideals, the woman says that peace, tranquility, and the family you love existed only in dreams or illusions. The woman explains that good people, frustrated by their helplessness, despaired and went mad. The woman explains that fear, madness, and voices filled with malice. Faye explains that with its help, one could free oneself from everything, stop fearing those who hurt them, and take revenge on them. He explains that those seeking salvation became strangers, and the number of dark traders controlling this process increased in an instant. Faye explains that the world was divided. The guy says these ruins were built so people wouldn't forget, and so something like this would never happen again, and also to honor the one who took up the sword and put an end to the chaos. He says no, and asks if that's true. The girl asks him to wait and explains what's depicted there most likely. The guy says there should be clues to where she might be. Faye says he doesn't think she's here, and that he never heard or saw such an ability in that world. He explains that whoever made these ruins didn't have such a power either, and he never wanted to acquire it. Faye asks him to wait. He says that no one will be saved if they live in illusions. The girl explains that time magic is nowhere to be found, but she thinks it exists. The man explains that time magic doesn't exist, but the person Shizuki met this morning said it does. The girl with the bow says that the woman says that if the magic were to work, they would want to go back in time, and she's human like everyone else, so she'd be tempted. She explains that even if they use this magic, it would probably be impossible to change everything exactly the way they want. The man says he doesn't think magic can do everything. The woman says it was ringing annoyingly all the time, but now it's suddenly gone completely silent. The man says that even if Shizuki lets him go, he must continue working, and the girl asks if there was a reason he let him go. The woman explains, no, he must have entered the forest of illusions. Faye announces that they are following them, and asks if he minds. The man explains that he is indebted to the Carcass family, and if they die, it will be on his conscience. Faye says that they confidently insist that they will follow too. The man explains that in this forest, everywhere except that. The man explains that, having lured the magnificent material with his name, the alien's power depends on the quality of the material, that is, the person who becomes it. He explains that they probably want to make Elena an alien, and the man says that the other knows this, but the man explains that she possesses the high magical power inherent in members of the ancient royal line of Karsus, and that she had to endure the death of her entire family, left alone by strangers. He explains that there is a high probability of a hero outside the forest who is setting the plan in motion, and that Rune has experienced soldiers. Faye explains that protecting them and allowing them to escape will require a power comparable to his own, and that it will be the other person's responsibility. The man explains that he doesn't intend to allow more aliens to appear. The girl asks what they've been talking about all this time. He says it's just around the corner. He explains that it looks like a building he saw in the dead city. The man reports that there are 3 guards at the entrance, an ice gravedigger, and others somewhere on the upper levels. He asks if they're being attacked head-on, to which the man replies. The guy explains that the upper levels, visible to the naked eye, aren't the most important thing. What matters is what's deep underground. He explains that the large wall paintings were left by his friend, and he has no doubt about it, so that the story with the aliens never happens again. Faye says it may seem like a joke, but in the world he lived in, even those who hated aliens saw them as salvation. He explains that it was a world in which the dominance of the strong over the weak was considered normal. The man explains that under the guise of stupid ideas and ideals, the woman says that peace, tranquility, and the family he loves existed only in dreams or illusions. The woman explains that good people, frustrated by their helplessness, despaired and went mad. The woman reports that fear, madness, and voices filled with malice. Faye explains that with its help, one could free oneself from everything, stop fearing those who hurt them, and take revenge on them. He explains that those seeking salvation became strangers, and the number of dark traders controlling this process increased in an instant. Faye explains that the world was divided. The man explains that these ruins were built so that people wouldn't forget, and so that such a thing would never happen again, and also to glorify the one who took up the sword and put an end to the chaos. He says no, and asks if that's true. The girl asks him to wait and explains what's depicted there most likely. The man says there should be clues to where she might be. Faye says he doesn't think she's here, and that he never heard or saw such an ability in that world. He explains that whoever made these ruins didn't have such a power either, and he never wanted to acquire it. Faye asks for help. He says that there is no time magic anywhere, and that he thinks it exists. The girl says that if you live in illusions, you won't save anyone. The girl says she doesn't believe time reversal magic exists, but the man Shizuki met that morning said it does. The woman explains that just because they've never seen or heard of it doesn't mean it definitely doesn't exist, and agrees. If magic were suddenly found, you'd want to go back in time, Ratifa, he says. He's human like everyone else, and there'd probably be temptation. He explains that he spoke with Shizuki about this. Even if this magic were used, it would probably be impossible to change everything exactly the way they want, the girl says. Faye. The background depicts a man with a staff, addressing a group of people. The man warns them to ignore them, the Emperor of the Sword, and the girl warns them to watch their sword carefully. The boy says he's not planning on leaving yet, and the man is surprised. The man asks if the boy wants nothing left of these ruins. The boy explains that he'll manage somehow, but if it gets dangerous, he'll have to surface, although simply running away from him won't work. The man shouts out to Maluz. Faye informs him that the girl next to him is the property of the Empire, and he's taking her. The man explains that he was told it was enough for them to be alive and able to speak, and warns that if they interfere, he'll chop off everyone's arms and legs. Faye laughs and suggests giving it a try, the man explains. The man explains that he intentionally spread shadows everywhere, and when he came here, it turns out he can control an unlimited number of shadows formed by any light source. The man says this is an advantageous battlefield for Faye, noting that he doesn't seem tense. Faye explains that the large number of small ice shards through reflections increases the amount of light and weakens the shadows, allowing them to escape. Faye shouts that she'll buy time and orders them to leave quickly, without waiting. The man reports that there's an exit there, which the report didn't mention. The man apologizes and says he was afraid he might block it because it's too big, and the other man laughs and explains that if there's not enough space, he'll just force it open. He says the man will get some too, calling him a small fry. Faye says he's not planning on taking anything out just yet, and doesn't particularly want to destroy the ruins and be buried here with his interlocutor. The man laughs and says the interlocutor is still putting on a brave face, even after seeing his hailstorm, and adds that he doesn't mind. But the man notices that Faye's leg is all ready. He asks what he said about his leg. Small Fry explains that shadows can be used, and praises Faye for not being afraid of getting hurt because he can recover. Small Fry says that now he's even more eager to make Faye draw his sword, since he'll be fighting him specifically. Faye says, "Damn, where does that strength come from?" and scolds the monster. The girl explains that a monster is a poor compliment for a fragile girl. She asks where she's fragile. Faye explains that at the very beginning, the monster burned his arm to ashes and chopped it off. The woman says that even without the teacher, she was the sixth strongest of the seven and weaker than most of them, and asks how she can call herself anything other than fragile. The man says they are too weak and asks when she will finally make him crawl on the ground, as she promised. The woman says that since they can't handle her, they've decided to at least get rid of the head maid, but she explains that the Disturg's best maid shouldn't be underestimated. The woman explains that she believes maids need to be as strong or even stronger than princes and princesses to protect them. Faye tells him not to think he'll be aiming for his arm this time, he's aiming for his head. The girl explains that, unlike the others, she understands perfectly and orders him to pierce through. The girl shouts the name of the spell, Fulgor, and then releases a powerful electric shock. He says that he was thrown straight to the ceiling and adds that it happened because of this guy. Then he says one word, damn. The man tells her the name of the frost snake spell and says it won't end well. Faye tells her the name of the decay spell. The guy explains that the light is reflected unevenly, causing the shadows to be unstable, and says, damn. He strikes with a spear, but the man parries it and laughs, saying that he got hit and that the little ones are not bad. He curses. The man explains that if he draws the sword, he will promise not to turn the girl into a monster until he kills Faye and orders the delivery. Faye says the man sounds like some kind of vampire. The man explains that he doesn't need a deranged monster as an opponent. He'll be bait. The girl asks if he's bait. The man explains that lately everyone's been talking about a hero of this country, one recognized by the Empire. The man explains that he is called a worthless prince who rarely goes out in public, but at such a dangerous moment for the country he will have to appear, and this monster will be bait so that he can fight it. He reports that it turns out that the Imperials have occupied these ruins and want to turn Elena into an outsider. Faye suddenly stabs the man in the neck, who looks at the wound in amazement, and then Faye quickly steps back. He says it's difficult to answer the question of whose side he's on, and repeats the question. The man asks whose side he's on. He says it's difficult to answer that question. The guy says he doesn't understand what he's doing and asks him to wait. Faye says that for the past 14 years, nothing has happened. But as soon as he picks up a sword, disaster follows disaster, as if someone decided that if he picks up a sword, he must go straight to hell. He explains that this is the price he pays for not paying attention to anything for those 14 years. The woman tells him not to let anyone underestimate him, and that instead of making that face, it's better to laugh. He laughs. The man asks if he's distraught at the realization of the situation. He explains that he's not at all. He's not as daring as everyone else, so he needs to laugh. The guy says they shouldn't have underestimated him. The man explains that he's just pretending, and that it's a fragile shield, protecting what's inside with a lie on the outside, just like shadows envelop ruins. The man screams that this is complete nonsense. The man says that if Faye doesn't take out the sword, he will raze the ruins to the ground and kill the girl right before his eyes. He also orders her to stop pretending, calling him a small fry and asking what use it is in a life-or-death battle. Faye says she will make the man stop. The guy says that's all, after which the man apologizes to Rudolph and says that he left these ruins on purpose. The man explains that now Rudolph would say with a smile on his face that it's a matter of their pride, and adds that there's no need to be too afraid if you truly want to protect, and the enemy. Faye is surrounded by shadows that shroud the ruins and gather in one place. Grimnot Isaac laughs and says he never thought he'd meet such a talented opponent in such a place, pointing to Faye and calling him the opponent he's been searching for all this time. Then Grimnot. The boy says his name. The man says he must now state his name, telling it to the opponent he will be fighting in earnest. He says his name is Hans Diestberg. The man reports that despite the oddity, Faye is completely open to attack. The man with the spear attempts to strike, but Faye dodges and counters with a blow to the man's arm. The guy screams die and delivers a powerful blow with his sword. The man announces that a battle has begun between two people nicknamed the Strongest. Faye strikes the Imperial hero with his sword during a fight. The Imperial hero is surprised that Faye threw him aside, and with such a difference in their physiques, he doesn't understand how this could have happened. The man orders the enemy to be crushed, then he uses a move called the Funeral Hail. He says that the attack is falling. Faye explains that the swords aren't just weapons, but tools that can destroy everything around them. The man explains that these swords are capable of tearing apart space and time, and warns that if they aren't stopped, the world will be destroyed. He strikes, breaking the ground with his opponent's spear. The opponent retreats, and he continues the attack. The opponent laughs and says that this is how a real battle should be, that it makes the soul tremble, and that is its value. He objects, but the opponent confirms his words and continues. Faye says that this weapon is not a simple one, but a magical one, and explains that it can even penetrate a stone wall. The man explains that when he attacked Faye, Faye didn't have to block all the ice flows, only the ones that were flying straight at him, and point the rest of the swords in his direction, asking if that's the essence of Faye's fighting style. The man replies that he didn't even notice and didn't have any problems. Faye tells him that if he simply runs away until tomorrow morning, then what will happen? He says it's obvious. The man explains that there's no point in fighting Faye unless he uses his full power, and says he'll crush everything belonging to the Disbergs and freeze the ruins. The man laughs and says that in moments like these, it's handy to have a mind reader nearby. The man tells them to go before he changes his mind. He turns and starts to walk away. The man with the staff looks at his hand. The man with the staff walks up the stairs. The woman calls out to Shizuki and says they're safe, which is great. The man asks where is and says he told them to go rescue Shizuki, asking if he's with her. Shizuki replies no. The man asks if she's seen him, and the woman adds that there's only one door there. Faye says they need to leave the forest immediately. Kozan won't go, but he's memorized the route and orders them not to leave his side under any circumstances. The man explains that shouldn't go because they're their target and asks them to leave with Shizuki while he goes. The boy asks if he noticed anything. He calls Rem. Rem explains that he figured out there was a spy because there were inconsistencies in Cohen and the princess's conversation, and he'd long suspected there was a traitor in their midst. The girl and boy turn to Rem and the girl. The girl asks what Faye is saying. Faye explains that from the very beginning they wanted the princess to find refuge in this country. Faye then guarantees Elena's safety in the name of the Diasbergs. The boy explains that there's no need to kill the traitors, as this is Her Majesty's last will and testament, and he, as the last direct vassal of the Kingdom of Karsus, must fulfill her will. The girl asks what he's saying and expresses outrage that he wants to kill claiming that such a thing is unacceptable under any circumstances. The girl says she has no strength left and suggests they say goodbye here. She explains that ever since Karsus fell, they've been constantly searching for time magic, although it is unknown whether it even exists, and that they always claim it would be better if they died too. The man says that the Kingdom of Karsus. Faye says that he and the Queen, the elder sister, and probably too, would all like them to live freely. The woman tells him he should take this with him. He looks at his hand, covered in black energy. The man hands Faye a sword. The girl demands Shizuki be released and orders Rem not to leave, forbidding him from killing and insisting on his orders. Faye thanks him. Faye apologizes to the girl and for his selfish farewell and calls the girl Princess. Faye declares that she no longer obeys orders. The woman says that if he doesn't want her to die, he must make sure she doesn't die. He says that he doesn't want her to die. The woman says she can't take it anymore. She explains that she'll have to die someday anyway and asks why she continues to live alone. The woman says she's in so much pain and everything is so ridiculous. She asks Faye to kill her. Faye listens to the woman, who calls him Shizuki. There's a temporary pause in the fight with the ice gravedigger, but the situation in the Forest of Illusions continues to unfold. The girl reports that many of her attacks have been blocked, but this time the enemy's head will fly off. The ice gravedigger falls to the ground with force, and Faye asks what it is and if it's fog. The headmaid says it's all an illusion of the forest and orders them to move away from the tombstone immediately. The girl screams at the headmaid. The headmaid punches Faye in the face, who tells her to die. Then she grabs Faye by the hair and delivers a powerful blow. In the next shot, the headmaid is in a fighting stance with a broom in her hand. The girl looks on with a stained face. The woman informs the headmaid that the forest's power has increased, and the protective function has been activated due to them being close to the tombstone, just like it did with Trom's illusions. The woman says she no longer has a family, a country, or even friends, and she can't live alone. She asks if Faye can kill her. Faye explains that Shizuki is strong and can kill her quickly and painlessly with his sword, but replies that he can't. The woman says that if he helps her die, it will be the same as spitting on their efforts, so he cannot do it. Faye yells at Elena to stop. Elena pushes Faye away with her hand. Faye calls out to Elena again. Faye notices that the fog has become thicker than before and orders Elena to answer, expressing irritation. The woman says she's crying again and says her name is Elena. The woman tries to say something, making sounds like M-A-A-A. The woman continues saying M-A. The woman makes sounds like ah, M-G, G. The girl calls the woman's sister and repeats the word several times as she runs up to her. The woman tells her that Shizuki says there's no time magic and that and Rem are gone. The girl explains that she tried but couldn't and begins to cry, clinging to the woman. The girl says she seems to be heading in the same direction but can't turn back. She explains that it's the power of the illusion forest and says they need to find Retifa quickly. Faye turns to a girl named Feely. Feely asks why he's doing this and says that he's doing something. The guy asks why he's showing the person he least wants to meet in this world. The man in the cloak explains that if he's going to show illusions, he should show good ones, like Itis. The guy repeats the question, asking why. The boy reports that the fog doesn't seem to be clearing. The girl explains that the illusions of Trom are no joke and that they should quickly go find the headmaid. The boy says that if the illusions in the forest are powered by the power of Trom, then this tombstone is one of 4. The woman explains that it's easy to break, and if the forest power disappears, so will the line of defense protecting the country from the empire. Similarly, if the stone breaks, nothing can be done. The woman says that one must, just as the teacher did, feel the flow of power and the girl tells him not to underestimate her and calls him a vile imposter. Faye says the fog is clearing and the illusions are gone, and also reports that the forest's power has weakened. The girl explains that it's Ratifa. Faye exclaims that it's thunder. The woman says she's her sister, and the girl says she's an illusion. The woman confirms this. The girl reports that her sister died that day along with Karsus. The woman explains that the queen couldn't rely on the medicines from the empire, screaming that she needed them and asking for them to be returned. In the room, the man explains that in his memories his mother is always crying, and the woman says that everything around. In the top left, a man explains that thanks to the efforts of his sister and the knights who fought to protect him, the monster that appeared in his mother's place turned to dust. In the top right, a man explains that everyone was lying in a pool of blood, and suddenly, the servants, his father, and the aristocrats. The woman asks what she's doing at such a late hour. The girl explains that she was looking for medicine for her mother. The man says he'll give her a new medicine that her mother seems to really need and suggests she take it whenever she needs it. He gives the girl 2 and reminds her not to forget about it. The girl. Faye reports that the fog has completely disappeared and she couldn't have gone far. He finds Elena and says he barely found her. Elena picks up a small object from the ground. Faye yells at Elena to stop. He screams to stop and runs through the bushes in the forest. The girl says she's going to swallow a small object. The man looks at the object carefully, holding it between his fingers. Water bursts out of Faye's hand. Faye excitedly says that she knows if the girl had swallowed the pill, there would be no turning back, and asks her to stop doing something stupid. The girl addresses Faye, calling him Your Highness, and asks what he's doing here. The girl asks. He says the other man is strong enough to fight monsters in the Empire, and he has everything, but he will never understand what he's feeling now. The girl explains that everyone is dead. Her country, her friends, her family, all abandoned her, and her remaining comrades abandoned her as well. she asks. The girl screams, "Just kill her!" The man calls out to Shizuki. The man suddenly stretches out his hand. In the top panel, a girl is crying, supported by a man and a woman. The woman with long hair is speaking, the girl with short hair is listening, and the man next to her is also speaking. In the bottom panel, a woman with long hair in a maid costume tells the girl with short hair to stop whining. The elf woman says that what the girl is saying sounds more like a spoiled child. Then the girl with a wound on her face says that the stupid girl should stop whining. The hooded man laughs and says that he doesn't care. The woman says, "Your Majesty, how can you?" Faye says that suicidal idiots who don't understand words should be hit hard, but she also insists that this isn't true, accusing Philip of setting a bad example. The girl explains that she didn't want to face the truth before, was left alone, weak, and the man says there are many people who wanted to live, but died. The girl says she's alive and asks him not to think about suicide anymore. The man explains he has no respect for those who don't value their lives and says he will never forgive such people. Faye says he won't let the girl give up until she changes, and demands she stop being a foolish girl. He explains that if she hates being weak, she must show that she can be strong, alive, outlive everyone, and keep working until his grandchildren grow up. The girl says she has no respect for those who don't value their lives, and calls it unforgivable. She explains that she refuses to accept the way her interlocutor believes in saving her life, sacrificing her own, and hiding behind the lives of the dead. The girl asks to live, even if nothing works out, and even if. Faye says, "Please." The girl explains, "Believe that salvation will come one day." Faye tells Elena. The girl says that because she is alive, she could shed so many tears. Faye says that this power doesn't protect those dear to you. In the countryside, someone always helps him, but in the end, he's left alone and unable to save anyone, calling this power weak. He then explains that despite this, if the other person still wants it, he can give them the way of the sword, like theirs. He says that he told her to live freely, right? And he asks her not to ignore the last words of her loved one. The girl asks him. Faye says he's known as the Trash Prince, and laughs. Faye then explains that he thought everything would be fine if he left the girl with Feli, so he talks a lot, and the girl tells him he's just a weak, spoiled brat. He says that when he was kind, and asks what he's talking about. The girl says that's exactly what she's thinking about. The man says he initially thought he was lucky when he met Faye, but he was wrong because she follows him around and won't calm down. Faye explains that this is the best option he's come up with, and that he's not saying, "Don't fight her." The man says he wouldn't want that. The man tells him not to worry, that he won't die from a random attack, and reminds him that he wants to see his full power. The man says that before he begins, he'll tell him something. He says that he won't leave the man a chance to hit him. The man laughs and says that he's as strong as ever. The man says there's no need to thank him, and asks if Faye understands that this isn't what he wants right now. Then the man says they'll continue fighting, addressing Faye Hans Diesberg. The guy asks him to tell him if Latifa is safe. The girl replies that she's not sure, but most likely yes. The man tells Elena to wait there and not go anywhere. Faye says that since the girl says so, it must be so, and orders him to protect Elena, to which the girl replies that she understands. The man says it only takes one fatal blow. Faye explains that his mind and body must always be on the battlefield. The man thanks her for waiting and says that this time he will lay out. He says, "Great sage." The man asks why he doesn't run away. The man explains that if it hurts, you should run away. If you're sad, you should just turn your back. He reports that when he asked the man about this, he said, "Why live in suffering?" The man says, "Well, well." Faye says she'd rather die at the bottom of a ditch than agree with these words. The hooded man explains that Faye truly hasn't changed. Faye struggles to reach something, and the hooded man says it's just a little bit more. The hooded man is confident. He asks to return, addressing the Emperor of Swords. Faye calls out Shadow Swords, then attacks with them. The man calls out Ice Hail and strikes. The man explains that he and Faye have similar techniques and suggests they see who's better at them. Faye dodges the man's attack. The woman explains that he fills the place with cold air, then instantly creates and manipulates ice the size of His Highness's sword. His magical power rivals that of Prince Shuten. The man explains this, and he deflects the attack using a long weapon. The man announces that this is the most powerful hero in the Empire, Ice Gravedigger. The man shouts, "Shadow Slash," attacking the enemy. The man shouts, "Ice Snake," using a magical attack. Faye strikes with his spear, knocking the long-haired man back. Then the long-haired man slashes at Faye, who dodges and screams. The long-haired man looks at Faye with determination. He screams as a whistling sound is heard near him. The man strikes, causing an explosion that destroys part of the building. The man explains that even if you compensate for the lack of strength with more swords, you can't compensate for the difference in physical strength. Faye says he's strong and swears, then says the other guy isn't cool at all right now. Shizuki explains that due to certain circumstances, her face and clothes are a little dirty right now and asks him to look that way, as she wants to stick to her girlish policy. Faye yells that he understands and demands. He says all the shadows are under his control. The man says the shadows are getting thicker. The girl explains what it is. The man with the eye patch, the other man, and the girl react to what's happening, and the girl says, Faye speaks here and reports that this is the Shadow Corpse, triumphant return. The guy says the sword's shape has changed. The man explains that the sword's shape has changed. He says, ugh. The girl looks at Faye. He stands among many swords covered in cracks and black energy. The girl looks forward. The man says it's wonderful. He's encountered many swordsmen in his life, but this is the first time he's seen someone so fixated on their sword. The man explains that this isn't quite right. It's a magi that embodies both swords and shadows, a shadow corpse, a triumphant return. Faye says that if he can protect or save someone, if he can change, then he'll continue to endure all this and swing his sword. He'd rather live and try to change than sit there crumbling in tears for the day when he can die with a smile, the man explains. The guy says he doesn't have to say it and that he's already shaking with joy. He then explains that all the swords are under his control. Finally, the guy says he'll blow all the shadow swords to pieces. Faye runs forward, smashing her shield through the wall. The man shouts that a hailstorm is coming and attacks with a fiery strike. He explains that these swords are different from those in the ruins and are not washed away by light. The man and Faye engage in combat, clashing. He says he can pinpoint the enemy's location by the movement of ice shards and asks if the enemy has concealed his presence. The man explains that he will borrow Traum from Faye and wonders why the enemy suddenly changed his fighting style. The boy delivers a powerful blow, creating a vortex of water that rushes forward. Faye holds her weapon in surprise and tension, parrying the attack. The man says he's changed his sword and names the ice snake. He says Rudolph. Rudolph raises his sword and strikes the ice snake. Faye says Anya. The man says Nush. Faye strikes. The man aims his sword down. Then Faye attacks. The man calls Ratis. The boy delivers a powerful sword strike to the man, who raises his hand holding a piece of wall. The man says it's his turn. The boy steps forward sharply, preparing for the next move. Faye explains that his sword could have been wielded with both hands to break a spear, but he used only his left. He reports that his interlocutor's actions are neither arrogant nor strange, and that his swordsmanship is superb. Faye explains that if his guess is correct, the sword's previous owner, he claims to be able to determine the swordsmanship of those who are no longer destined to fight. The man explains that he can't read minds, but it's quite interesting. The man recounts what he saw, heard, experienced, and that he was entrusted with the triumphant return of Shadow Cops. The man says that. Faye laughs and says, ha ha ha, then says ku and fa. Faye explains that the other one doesn't know anything and shouldn't act like he knows anything when addressing Grimnaths. Faye laughs, Grimnath shouts, ha ha ha. Faye rushes forward, and gee, he says, Lizenia. He strikes the enemy with his sword. The enemy is wounded in the arm and stomach, holding on to the staff. Faye says she's not afraid of the enemy. He says he's not scary at all and orders her to run. Faye then launches a shadow strike, destroying objects around her. He reports that he killed the monster. Faye informs the Ice Wolf of the defense. Faye notices the wolves and says his attack didn't work, asking if it's an illusion. Faye realizes the wolves aren't an illusion but a mass of cold air that can instantly freeze a target and is struck. The man says he's not so magnanimous as to simply give up the victory. He explains that fighting an opponent without revealing his cards is no fun. The man says he's finally met a worthy opponent. The man reveals that he's already revealed all his cards and asks why Faye isn't using a sword that looks exactly like his among the countless swords, calling it a one-sided and curved blade. The man explains that the sword is so special that Faye is afraid to hold it, or it's... He says that his interlocutor previously said he wasn't afraid of him, and explains that on the battlefield, the one who is overcome by fear first will perish. He explains that even if the fear is superficial, instilling it in the enemy means hastening victory, but this only works if you want to win. He explains that he doesn't particularly want to. Faye says he just wants a fair fight. The man says that even if he loses his weapon and arms, he still has magic, legs and body, and even if he has to freeze himself until he dies, it is not such a high price to pay. He explains that this is true. The man laughs and says how exciting and intoxicating it is, and asks how much pleasure it will give Faye Hans Disberg. Faye Hans Disberg reveals her name. The man asks if this isn't better and wonders if Faye agrees. He says that one shouldn't think that such a filthy life has any human value. He explains that they are simply murderers and tells them that in the end, that man was just a piece of trash who killed tens of thousands of people to survive. He declares that he hates the sword and desires peace. Faye says that if you think for even a moment about wanting to save someone, you already know what you'll do. He reveals that it is an ice dragon, the owner and guardian of this icy world, who will destroy the entire world if it is not defeated. He explains that the drawn shadow sword is aimed at the dragon. Faye says, kill them all, and does a shadow strike. A man with a spear attacks Faye, who dodges the blow and is then wounded in the head. The man with the spear reports that his attack was successful and continues his advance, summoning numerous swords that rain down. The man delivers a powerful blow, shattering the wall. Faye dodges the attack. The man forms a fist out of stone and strikes. Faye parries the attack with her sword. The man prepares for another blow, and Faye deflects the stone shards. He says he hopes it will help someone who is in the same pain as him and that he wants to show them the way. Faye says that by swinging her sword, she wants to show him that there is salvation, even if you have to live with a painful past and present, and she wants him to believe it because a bright future can still await us all, and that's why he will defeat him. The man apologizes that it's only for that reason, but the woman explains that a sword should initially be chosen according to one's abilities, and there is no point in having a great sword if you don't know how to use it. He says not to touch the sword. Faye explains that this isn't like using Letisse's swords. Firstly, the shadow sword itself is the shadow of his master's sword, simplified to suit him. He explains that he's weak, so he should follow his master's advice and use a sword suited to his abilities. Faye explains that he knows that. He says he doesn't know how to give up. The girl asks to be the trash prince. The man asks to lend him his power. The boy turns to the teacher with a request. Faye says that he called the teacher's name and he received his sword, then shouts the name Vincent. He says that Kirito 11-2 is the one without whom none of this would have been possible, since he doesn't speak Japanese. He explains that Kirito 11-2 knows Photoshop well enough to erase text from an image, insert letters, and select suitable fonts, and also notes that he's responsible for his lack of knowledge of Russian language rules. Faye says to attack before he dies and calls it ice burial. The man says it's a fight to the death and calls it sword emperor. Then Faye and the man strike each other simultaneously. The woman then says, just think about killing the enemy standing in front of you. He says, don't think about the consequences, otherwise you'll be caught off guard. The guy explains, well, he's not that strong anyway. The man says, if you don't want to die, put your whole heart and soul into defeating him. Faye says he already knows what he must do and wants to show them what awaits them after they survive. He says he'll squeeze every last drop of blood out of them. The man calls for the ice dragon to awaken and declares an ice attack. He tells her to use all her strength and give it her all. Compressed, icy air is no match for a wolf. He says he'll show her a fight, a slash, and death. The girl says she still doesn't want to die, unable to say anything. Faye says there's just one word, wish, and all you have to do is just wish. He then reminds her that he's notifying her. After that, Faye tells her it's correct and suggests repeating it. He says he can't afford to die because he has a dream he wants to achieve. He explains that he's not going to give up and intends to keep fighting despite his wounds and fatigue. Faye says that if he can't win, he will die, and that he can't afford to die. He delivers a notice. The man with the eye patch delivers a notice. The man with the beard delivers a notice. The girl delivers a notice. The man in the cloak delivers a notice. He delivers a notice. I deliver a notice. Faye says that there is nothing his shadow sword cannot cut. He screams, and the man responds with the same scream. They continue to fight, hitting each other. Faye screams as she attacks her opponent with her sword. The man screams back as he strikes back. Faye screams as he continues to fight. The man screams as he fights Faye. Faye screams as he is wounded. The man screams as he fights Faye. He laughs as he strikes and continues to laugh when his opponent is wounded. He communicates that he is in trouble. Faye says he can't die because he's a demon. Faye then strikes him with his sword, causing the body of his fallen opponent to appear on the ground. He says that's what he wants to say and asks to stop there. He then reports that it seemed to him that the other person was enjoying it right up until the very end. Faye says this code is for those who want to support him with rubles and simply throw money at the screen. He explains that translator Kirito 11-T is the one without whom none of this would have been possible, since no one, not even himself, knows Japanese. Faye explains that cleaner Kirito 11-2 seems to understand. He reveals that his magic isn't perfect and explains that during his time on Demon Island, he didn't have enough magical power to heal. The girl asks him not to overexert himself. He says he knows and can heal with magic too. The girl asks if Faye has a magic knife. Faye says he wants to talk to her when they get back. The girl asks, "Your Highness?" Faye explains that after that. He announces the title of the episode, Reincarnation. The woman informs us that we can use this to enter the ruins as many times as we want. The man warns us not to treat people as convenient magical tools. The man explains that as long as he studies history, that's enough for him, and he doesn't care who the sponsor is, the Empire or a wealthy merchant from Linzell. Faye reports that the boy who was the girl's hostage is eating noodles next to her. The girl explains that she only stayed in the Empire to study history and says everything is fine. Faye explains that now that this has happened, he needs to return to his mistress before anything else happens. The girl insists. The guy asks that if they cut, then everything will be okay, and asks for this, and the girl agrees and says that after they eat, he wants to talk to him before his resolve runs out. He says, okay. The man with glasses explains that this is crucial for them and asks to leave them. Faye asks the girl if she believes in reincarnation. The girl calls it history and confirms it. Faye is silent, then the girl looks at him in surprise. Faye takes the scissors in her hand and clasps her knees. A guy hugs a girl and says he'll always be with her, and she replies that she'll always be with him too. The man says they're still together, and the girl confirms it. The guy explains that they shouldn't separate, and the girl agrees. The man says they've won, and the girl says they can rest now. Faye explains that while living under the name Faye, he wondered about being reincarnated many times, noting that his faces, eyes, hair, and height were all different. He reports that his memory remains, and his personality seems unchanged, but he is no longer Shizuki. Faye explains that he initially thought. The woman reports that he was nowhere to be found. He says that all he had was a physical sensation that was different from his past memories. Faye tells him he's still dead and alone. The girl explains that the previous life is reincarnation and asks what it is. She explains that life only comes once, so everyone desperately clenches their teeth, clings on, coughs up blood, and tries to survive. He says he simply didn't want to be alone, and even in his second life, nothing has changed. He explains that, having picked up the sword with a sense of self-satisfaction, he thought only of his future, ready to die. Faye says he wants to take her hand. The girl explains that she wants to live a normal life, just like before. He says that he can't take this hand and explains that it's not that he wants to die now, but despite everything, he, the man, says that Your Highness is too kind. The woman explains that 50 years ago, her homeland, the Sacred Mountain, was burned to the ground by the monsters they spoke of, and that she was the only one who managed to escape and survive, attempting to choose death as atonement. She explains that the previous lord severely scolded her and called her. The girl says that initially she was supposed to do it, but decades later, when she finally set foot on the Sacred Mountain, it was filled with tombstones and flowers. From the inscriptions on the tombstones, she immediately understood who erected them. Faye says that Your Highness raised his sword, his gaze fixed on her, and met everyone face to face. The girl asks if he thinks Your Highness should feel guilty again and suffer more. Faye explains that this is not the case. Then the girl asks if this isn't enough already. The woman says she's not asking him to forget the past because memories are part of who he is, and that she won't forget hers either. She then explains that there's no need to suffer more than necessary. The woman asks Faye to accept the world he lives in right now. He remains silent. The woman says they're no longer alone. She explains that if they're ready to take her hand, then the man apologizes and says he'll leave himself, asking to be left alone for a while. The woman understands. Faye says he knew this would happen if he told Feely everything, and says he's made a lot of mistakes. Faye makes a noise, then screams. Faye says she's always too kind. It's as if he's drowning in her. Her words are as sweet as nectar. Her eyes are filled with compassion. He says he seriously doesn't know what to do. He says the shadow isn't so kind and should just keep quiet. The girl asks if they've finished talking with His Highness. The girl informs him that Tiara and His Highness have known each other for a long time, and that they've been together for a long time. Tiara explains that she overheard a conversation in front of a stone slab, which is typical of interactions with His Highness. Tiara asks if the girl thinks so. Faye reports that this is the first time he's been healed by the headmaid's magic and is amazed that everything is healing so quickly and beautifully. The headmaid explains that it was a minor wound due to the Shizuka. Faye says it's a shame she didn't tell him about it sooner, since it happened. The woman says that if she revealed her true identity, he would be happy, but at the same time, he would be very dependent on her. She hopes he will never become the most pathetic person in the world again and wouldn't want that to happen to Shizuki. The girl says she doesn't want to reveal her identity to him. The girl says she just wants to watch Shizuki, being close, and that right now and then that's all she needs. The man explains that back then they were almost the same age and he already had similar feelings, but now they're older and he's at the age where his boss is worried about his marriage. The woman reports that the teacher called their encounter with Shizuki a miracle, and the girl says she thought so too. The woman explains that thanks to a miracle, she was reincarnated and met the reincarnated Shizuki, and that's what she thinks. The woman in the water says that's why. The top panel on the right depicts birds flying over a forest. The middle panel on the right shows a building with arches, and the left panel shows a staircase. In the large bottom panel, Faye states that the damage is minor, examining ancient cave paintings. He says that this depicts a swordsman who once fought a monster. The girl asks if this is the Sword Emperor. He explains that it is a different person. He explains that the person who created these ruins died before the Sword Emperor was called that, and asks how. The guy says the image shows monsters being destroyed, and explains that the Sword Emperor is Faye. He explains that the amount of information he received was so powerful that it destroyed his emotions, and it was entirely possible that he could see into the distant future and foresee the fate of his friends, but if he could see it, he might not realize it. He reports that he did not talk about the future he saw. Faye reveals that he left behind a knife that was unnecessary and can die proud that his life had value, explaining that leaving something behind is meaningful. He apologizes for being selfish and says he wants Shizuki to check it out for him, as he's certain it's impossible for him, Faye explains. He informs her that this concerns the true identity of the Empire's great sage. The man explains that they will continue their journey by carriage and meet the boss in another city. The man explains that he is glad their relationship didn't last as long as he thought, and warns that if they get caught in the crossfire. The woman says Cohen said they were the only ones in the forest, and that he might still be alive. The man says Cohen would have cooperated if asked. The man asks if they should look for those two. The woman explains that she spoke with Cohen and doesn't need to look for him. Faye explains that Rem, and even Shizuki made her think it was a hoax, and she doesn't think anything will change along the path Reem has laid out for her. The girl says she thinks it would be nice to be trained by this racer, and Faye says that she could also do a little bit of shamanism. He says he's sure they'll meet again. Shizuki says bye-bye and waves, and he calls her by name. The girl says that if it were her from the past, he would simply hide and join the Empire, but Faye explains that even a man like him is not alone and wants to dream. The guy says that if he doesn't find an answer, he'll just do what he likes, reflecting on the meaning. The woman reports that the Empire has resurrected monsters for the first time in thousands of years, citing tolerance. She explains that, coincidentally, the Sword Emperor who destroyed the monsters was reborn in the same era. The woman reports that the ruins that warned of the monster's presence were found in the same country. The girl says that if they were to explain all this away as a miracle or coincidence, it would be too convenient, and she would feel bad. The man says that it's not just the cunning, mentioning Traum and Rudolph. He explains that if that's not the case, then what if everyone else was behind it, besides him? And Faye says that by separating the soul from the body, retaining memories and abilities, ignoring the passage of time, such extraordinary lineage and mastery, he says he knows only one person. The man explains that if we defeat the reborn monster, Shizuka and I, what if we were sent? He says he can only think of one person who could reincarnate him and Shizuki together. The woman says the Sword Emperor is disgusting. Faye tells her to wake up and then explains that they'll soon arrive in Diasburg. He says he's done something wrong. Faye says she's lost her mind due to exhaustion, while the other man explains that he's actually sleep-deprived and doesn't see it as a problem, adding that anyone who slept from 11 p.m. to 1 p.m. shouldn't complain. Faye reports that a lot of things happened in the Forest of the Lost. The maid informs you that your beloved brother has come to play. He says he doesn't want to participate at all, and why is someone always interrupting his sleep, and if there are any other things to do. The girl asks if you could at least show a little gratitude. He explains that he was hoping to finally get some restful sleep in his own room. Faye says he has business today and is about to leave, but the girl insists on talking and telling him more about what happened in the Forest of Delusions. Faye explains that he does have business, and he wouldn't have gotten up so early otherwise. The girl realizes that these are the same monthly chores. The man asks. He asks why her, reminding her that she usually does it herself. The maid informs him that an important guest is arriving today, so she can't leave the castle. He explains that it's therefore imperative that she go with Latifa. Faye says, and then asks what it is about the important guest. The girl explains that His Majesty and the others talked about it yesterday at dinner and asks if he heard anything. Faye says there's definitely something about the chairman and wonders what could possibly happen to him. The woman reports that at the Council of Leaders of the Union, the chairman of the meeting is not a representative of the host country, but a delegate of the completely neutral state of Regaria. And before the start of the meeting, a special appointment ceremony is held with the participation of a representative of the host country, a representative of Regaria, and 4 clergymen of this. Faye says the flower is already reserved by another customer. He then asks if Warwick said he wasn't sure he'd be coming today, and says he did, but it looks like he's somewhere further away. The man notices the shop is open and asks if there's anyone there. He says the clothes are unusual for these parts and asks if it's a child. The girl doesn't say anything. He reports that she's heavily painted and even perfumed. The guy explains that he's going to buy 7 spider lilies at once. The girl is surprised and asks if he's planning to buy that many flowers. The man explains that the gentleman is going to buy those flowers. The girl says that's understandable and will let the guy buy the flowers, but explains that she has important people to meet. The girl says she's unsure and hesitant. Faye says he'll choose then. The girl points to a flower and says it's this one. Faye asks if it's really for him, then says she told him to choose. The girl announces that she will become Faye's mother. He says, the girl screams, expressing great surprise. Faye says that in any case, it's better to return to the castle as soon as possible. He says your sword is disgusting. The man calls the other the Sword Emperor without hesitation. Faye looks ahead in surprise. The man says it's truly interesting and laughs, then says that, no matter what, they finally met again, turning to Faye. The girl tells Nayuta that here she is, her destiny. The woman says there's no point in arguing. He says he's a proper, upstanding priest now, no matter what, and laughs. The man explains that they never introduced themselves and apologizes for the missed opportunity. Yelk says his name is Yelk Schuhauer. Matthias Marakaran says it's a pleasure to meet King Diesberg. He explains that he is the head of the ducal house of Marakaran, father-in-law of King Regalia, and is involved in state affairs with close ties to the church and business circles. The man explains that due to the difficult subject matter of the stories, Father Yokshu Gazir says that's not a bad thing either, and it's more interesting when everything is unusual. Sister Borboreta asks why a maid and whether they're usually mages or something similar. The man asks if it's true that spirit people live longer and asks if that's true. The man announces that these 4 will conduct the chairman's inauguration ceremony. Faye explains that they are an armed priest, a child, and a representative of another race, calling the lineup interesting. The man explains that Yelk is quite strong, so he also serves as a bodyguard. The woman explains that he says the monster is able to see the death of others. The man with glasses is surprised and says Yelk. The girl asks if he can see like Princess Rishen of the Kingdom of Rinzel. The girl explains that it's not the same power that allows them to see the world with only a superficial glance, and tells. Faye reports that the priestess is still very young, not even 100 years old. The man with horns explains that no one can escape fate. The girl in the dress explains that this is a woman, and even she can't see her fate. The girl in the maid costume says all that remains is to look under her skirt, and the woman explains that while a human infant's lifespan rarely lasts 100 years, fate is as thin as a thread, and for other races, it's probably so thin that even Nayuta can't discern it. Nayuta says that, indeed, besides old man Julius, she hasn't met any representatives of other races. The husband. Faye reports that Shuton was constantly dying until recently, and his chain bears numerous traces of these vibrations. Gririal explains that he was in grave danger, balancing on the brink of life and death, and that it wasn't here, but somewhere far away. Faye asks, so it's possible to understand even. The woman says she wants to meet Fame, and the girl asks Mateus if she can go see Faye. He hears his name being called. The man with glasses asks if this is the same 3rd prince who is currently recovering, and the king asks how the conversation turned to F. The girl announces that she will become a mother to Faye. The man in the chair explains that he can't afford to be weak because he has a family he's responsible for, and he must protect them. The man in glasses explains that they must all work together to overcome difficulties. Faye says that in 1,000 years, a person with the same face might appear, and remembers the guy. He explains that he doesn't know his name. Faye says that they didn't even introduce themselves back then. He notices that the same face has the same laugh. He says it's simply unbearable. Someone told the girl where his room is, and decides to take a nap here for now. The girl asks Faye if he's going to sleep outside. Several people call out to Faye. Faye asks how the girl always finds him, and how she knows where he is. The girl explains that Faye's destiny is longer than that of ordinary people, and from the other side it is even more visible, although he balances on the edge and is ready to fall. She says that despite his strong vitality, he is too melancholy. The girl says that her mother is no longer in this world, so she only tried to imitate the saint, whom everyone loves and respects as if she were their mother. He says that's enough and asks what he should do next. The girl asks if they will play hide-and-seek again. He thinks, then the girl puts her hand on his. The girl says that she loves it most when the teacher does this, and that she feels so good when he pats her on the head and praises her. The woman says that he's a good boy. Faye says there's nothing wrong with wanting to be in her mother's arms, because Shizuki knows how nice it is to be in Marin's arms. He stands up abruptly. The girl says that it looks like he got rejected. The guy runs away. Faye says that the little child and the priest look more like bandits and are indeed clerics who came from Regalia. The girl asks if this means they actually met them at the flower shop. The woman says she doesn't know what they were talking about with the girl, but it had something to do with the priest. The girl asks what that man's name was. The woman explains that the name Yelk Schukhauser is quite rare even in Regalia and refers to Mr. Julius. The girl asks, what exactly? The voice says it seems he's been turned away. Faye explains that he's headed toward the servants' quarters. The girl asks what's wrong if he's jealous and says she's not going to pat him on the head but that she better go back and ask her teacher about it. She notices that Faye seems. Chapter 50. Mother. The man says, no way. He says, damn. The girl says, A. The woman explains that the windows outside her room, where she doesn't return all day because of work, are considered a convenient place for lounging, and asks if the priests from Regalia have come to visit her father on an official visit. Faye explains that they are probably currently relaxing in the honorary guest hall. He explains that there was a girl of about 6 with pigtails and earrings. The girl asks if he's talking about His Highness's new mother. The man reacts with surprise. The woman explains that Prince Shutin convinced His Majesty to grant him permission to have an audience with you, and the boy says he knew it was him and must have let it slip about his room. The girl says everyone is very worried about you. The woman says they always thought you were. The guy says they lived at the very bottom, the worst possible life. But even now, he's convinced that this kind of life is what's called quiet happiness. Then the guy explains that she died the day he met the teacher. Faye says the first reason he decided to move on was his mother, who allowed him to continue living. He explains that it was probably because he didn't have a mother after reincarnation that he was able to accept his current family. The girl explains that Shizuka's only blood relative was his mother. He reports that his elder brother's mother maintains a proper distance from them, from him and from Shutin, and adds that she is Your Highness. The girl explains that Your Highness simply did not retain these memories, but that does not mean they did not exist. The maid with glasses apologizes and says she's bringing more papers, then asks if His Highness was just here. The head maid is surprised and says it's the head maid. The girl in the window starts to speak but can't finish her sentence. The head maid repeats the question, not. The girl tells Shizuki that he's done something wrong again. Shizuki explains that it's his mistake and asks to stop by to see His Highness later and see how he's doing. The girl understands and agrees. Shizuki reports that it seems a man named Yelk may be involved. The woman asks if that means she asked, and says that neither the teacher nor Resnia mentioned him to Shizuki. The girl says the woman called him a villain and asks what his crimes were. The woman explains that she doesn't know the details either. The boy says that if anyone was going to be involved, he was sure it would be that white-haired abomination. The girl says that, unfortunately, that's impossible, and that's fate. The boy explains that he has no reason to regret it, and that now it's clear why the teacher didn't go. The guy offers the girl to help Faye, but she refuses. The guy explains that he and Faye aren't friends at all, but are connected by the fact that they tried to kill each other, and if they fought now, who would win? The girl says he probably meant to say he was killed. Faye says he's so weak now, as if he's on the verge of death, and it's just disgusting. The girl asks how he can be so sure that things are different now, and that he recognized himself in him. The girl in the next shot says, I. The girl says it's still too much of a burden for him, master, and calls it fate or a curse. The girl asks what it is, turning to the woman. The woman explains that although it's thinner than the others, it's still clear that the woman is truly special. A sighing sound is heard. Faye, the man, and the girl look on with surprise and tension. He says it's not murderous intent, and that he has a strange feeling like someone is watching him. He then calls out to Nayuta and asks her to answer, and then, in surprise, addresses someone, saying, you. The man reacts to this. Faye says she's a cat, then says she has something in her mouth. The final shot shows her hair braided with a flower. The cat reports that Princess Higgin is with them. He explains that they don't plan to kill her, but if they want to return her unharmed, they'll have to cooperate. The boy asks if they should cooperate, and the man explains that if they promise, they'll release her immediately. The girl explains that they want him to use the boy's abilities to extract some information from a dead person. The man reveals that Yelk Shushauer is a grave robber. The boy says that, while the teacher is away, even Nayuta has managed to get involved, and explains that the detour he's chosen is too convoluted. Faye asks whose grave he's supposed to dig up. The girl explains that it's the unofficial hero of Regaria Asuka Hanze Distberg, Queen of Distberg. He reveals that the current king's concubine died 14 years ago and was a former imperial princess. He explains that he wants information about the empire's deepest secrets extracted from the remains of a woman buried in this country. Chapter 51 is called Grave Robber. The woman advises that they must be careful. The horned man explains that the situation is making him uneasy. Faye says they need to keep a close eye on things. He reports that the princess of the empire was given to Diasburg as a concubine, but after her death, she was officially buried as a member of the royal family, and this is evident at least in the way her two sons are treated. He explains that if the grave of the royal family of Diast is desecrated, Faye asks Julius if he knows anything, to which Julius replies that he simply remembered an old story. The man informs Julius that there is an emergency, and if he knows anything, he must speak up immediately. Retta explains that she has a strong urge to go to work, and he says he was a hero, skilled in gathering information. The man explains that his name has been known since ancient times, and there were rumors that he might not be human, but a representative of another race. The man explains that his appearance and abilities are still shrouded in mystery, and they also say that he is somehow. The woman reveals that there's a very deep connection between the hero and the priestess, and the man explains that the priestess is one of the influential figures in Diasburg. Faye says that if the one whose fate Nayuta couldn't foresee had decided to help, the kidnapping would have been easy. The man with horns explains. Borboreta informs her that, for the good of the country, it's best to dispel all suspicions surrounding her and explains to Master Mateus that she's not of royal blood, so a brief interrogation won't be a problem. Master Mateus warns Borboreta not to resort to violence and demands that she keep things conversational. Borboreta confirms. Faye says, "What a little bastard." The man says, "You're no exception, you can't escape your fate." He says he's looking for someone, and it turns out he's hiding with them. The man explains that even if he came out of his room, it means he wants to ask something. He replies that he only wants to express his dissatisfaction. The man calls Faye by name. He asks why the hell the man blabbed, where his. Faye explains that photographs were not popular in the Empire, and imperial servants did not allow them to be taken. He explains that this is a picture taken shortly before his birth. Faye explains that in that dark room, a woman held his baby in her arms and, relying on candlelight, looked around at the hanging pictures. The girl reports that now, on the eve of the meeting, all states are acting with extreme caution. He asks not to kill him. He explains that while he's alive, he'll come up with an excuse, but when you're dealing with a corpse, there's nothing you can do, and advises him to think clearly. The woman reports that it looks like he never returned to his room. The girl explains that there's no need to worry, as he often disappears suddenly like that. The girl says she'll try to look for him just in case, and the other woman says she'd be grateful. The man asks who they are, and the girl replies. The woman says that her interlocutor's face shows he knows something, and she will force him to tell her, even if it means using force. The man explains that the circumstances are now clear to him. The woman says that if the interlocutor wishes to speak with the head maid, he must first deal with her subordinate. Faye says he doesn't know who's behind this, but there's one condition. If Nayuta dies, his teacher will surely grieve. He explains that if the foreign guest is killed before the purification, who knows what will happen to Diasburg, and suggests opening the tomb and retrieving it. He says he caught the faint but distinct scent of death and calls his interlocutor a corpse eater, not a grave robber. The man explains that he doesn't know exactly how Faye's power works, but it's his doing, and it only takes one mark to be unmistakable. Faye says that he now understands why the teacher secretly buried Massacre's body, explains that he neither blindly worships monsters nor opposes them, but only continues to fight to satisfy his thirst for blood, hiding behind the dead and deceiving everyone, and on. He says the other guy just wants to fight him again. He says it's an army of the dead. He explains that, frankly, even now he wants to find Reznev's grave and rip it apart. The guy says it's a worthless, pathetic name. The guy says he's fed up with all this. Faye explains that he, not the guy, should be the one giving that speech, and says that it's the nickname Sword Emperor the guy has given him, and he has given it to himself too. The man laughs and says it's funny, damn funny. The guy says he'll kill and eat the remains of the other guy's mother, and if he doesn't want that, he should try killing him himself. The man says it's a rematch after 1,000 years, and he suggests they enjoy the fight. Faye strikes with his sword. The man parries it, saying that Faye's sword won't be able to penetrate his defense. The man explains that his body is covered in iron armor, and Faye's sword won't harm him. They both swiftly attack each other, their swords colliding in a powerful explosion. The woman says that the teacher can't be counted on and wonders what to do. The girl says that he's too busy negotiating to notice she's missing. The girl explains that, knowing Yoka, he'd rather fight Faye than save her. The man says that trouble. The woman says that Latifa will stop and that these are not heroes of the Empire, and they have no intention of conducting a peaceful discussion. Latifa explains that the Regalia priests were personally invited by Disburg, and if there are casualties or injuries among them, Disburg will lose his right to vote in the council. Faye reports that, while officially considered to be people of peaceful disposition and calm abilities, the heroes of neutral Regalia are unofficially known to exist as well, skilled in cruel deeds. The girl recounts that recently, a friend with a good ear told her a very interesting story about Regalia. The woman says she didn't expect the person she was talking to be a clergyman. She explains that she's simply helping to bring the truth to God and acknowledges that she has a bad character, but she's not the worst among heroes. The woman calls herself the Iron Maiden. Faye says he'll accept his punishment later, but he won't be able to talk to the Borboleds. He explains that the Borboleds are the type of people he hates most, and that no matter what he does, they won't talk. After he kills the person he's talking to, he'll extract all the information about Nab. The woman says she's unarmed right now and will try not to use her abilities, but don't get your hopes up. She explains that, other than her duel with Shizuki, she's never fought without killing anyone. Then the woman screams about being impaled, which leads to a dynamic scene. The woman explains that it is iron created by her magic, and she can turn it into sand at any moment. Then the woman stabs the man. The girl screams, then suddenly grabs the rope. The girl pulls the rope down with force. The man, his mouth open and drooling, makes a noise. The girl looks up. A woman talks about being held in an iron embrace, then calls it an Iron Maiden. Then an explosion occurs. The woman says it's enough to use it before it turns to sand. Then Faye grabs the man by the throat, and he makes a sound of pain. The woman throws the man to the ground.